This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I first noticed the smell on a late afternoon in July. I was watering my small garden behind the house, a regular chore I did every other day. I had my watering can and a hose coiled up nearby. The air was still, the sun low. I remember bending over to check the soil around the roses. That was when I inhaled something sweet, heavier than the usual scent of my flowers. It wasn't faint. It was strong and sugary, like a perfume I never bought. I paused. I looked around, thinking maybe a neighbor was spraying something, or maybe a new plant had appeared. My garden was simple: a few rose bushes, some lavender, a small patch of herbs, and a line of small shrubs. I saw nothing unusual at first. I sniffed again. The smell was there, lingering in the air. I shrugged and continued watering. I thought maybe someone had thrown something fragrant over the fence. The next day, the smell returned as I watered in the morning. This time, I found small petals scattered on the ground. They were pinkish, but not from my roses. My roses have a distinct shape and color, and these petals were more elongated, thinner. I picked one up. It felt soft and moist. I checked the fence line, the ground near the back corner. There, behind my shrubs, I spotted a tiny green shoot sprouting from the soil. It wasn't something I planted. I kneeled down and touched it. The leaves were smooth, a light green color. It had no flowers yet, just a small bud forming. I decided to leave it for now. Maybe a seed blew in from somewhere. I kept watering my usual plants. The smell grew stronger whenever I got near that shoot, though. It was odd. A plant that young usually doesn't produce such a strong scent. I tried not to think too much about it. Over the next few days, I noticed something disturbing. The small shoot grew fast. On Monday, it was the size of my thumb. By Wednesday, it reached my knee. It had broad leaves and small buds that looked ready to bloom. I pulled on its stem gently, trying to see if it was loose. It held firm in the soil. Its roots must have spread quickly. I considered pulling it out completely, but I hesitated. It could be some rare flower, maybe a gift from nature. Besides, I didn't want to damage my other plants. By the end of the week, the plant had grown taller than my knee and had multiple buds. Each afternoon, when I watered the garden, that sweet smell returned. It wasn't pleasant anymore. It felt heavy in my lungs, making my nose wrinkle. It was too sweet, overpowering everything else. I asked my neighbors if they noticed anything. They said no. They had no strange smells, no new plants. They just shrugged. I didn't push the issue. One afternoon, I discovered petals scattered along a path leading deeper into the garden. Bright, fresh petals that matched the buds on the mysterious plant. I followed them, crouching low. At the center, I found a newly opened flower on the plant. Its petals were pale pink with a glossy surface, like they were coated in sugar. I reached out to touch one. It felt slightly sticky, like sap. I pulled my hand back and wiped it on my jeans. The smell intensified over the weekend. Every time I watered my garden, I coughed a little, my eyes watered. It wasn't a chemical smell, just cloying sweetness. It reminded me of candy that had gone bad. The plant kept growing, spreading out. Its vines and leaves started to intertwine with my other plants, covering the ground and reaching toward the rose bushes. I tried pruning it. I took a pair of gardening shears and snipped off a few leaves. Sticky sap oozed from the cuts. I felt uneasy watching it drip. The next morning, the cut branches had regrown. Even more leaves now. The plant looked thicker, denser. The petals covered more ground, forming a trail along the garden path. I tried to rake them up. They stuck to the rake's metal tines, leaving a slimy residue. I washed the rake off with the hose, feeling frustrated. After a few days, I got fed up. The smell was making it hard for me to enjoy my garden. I decided to yank the whole plant out. I put on gloves, got my shovel, and started digging around the base. The roots were deep and tangled. I pulled hard. The plant's stem creaked, like tearing fabric. I managed to pull up a large portion of it, roots and all. I tossed it into a yard waste bag. I dug around, trying to remove every root. I saw thick white roots snaking deep into the soil. I pulled out as many as I could, my arms aching. When I finished, I was sweaty and covered in dirt, but I felt relieved. I had removed it. The scent lingered slightly, but without the plant, I hoped it would fade. The next morning, I checked my garden. My heart sank. The plant was back, bigger than before, occupying the same spot. New leaves, thicker stems, more buds. It looked as if I never removed it. The petals on the ground formed a thick carpet now. I bent down, breathing through my mouth to avoid the smell. I touched the soil. It was damp and loose. I wondered how it could grow so fast overnight. I tried again. I pulled the plant out, this time using more force, removing even more soil. I threw the entire mass into a garbage bin and wheeled it out to the curb. I checked the spot again, making sure I saw no trace of it. The soil looked uneven, but empty. Satisfied, I went inside, feeling tired and uneasy. The next afternoon, the plant had returned yet again. Now it covered twice the area, creeping over my herbs and blocking the small path between the rose bushes. The petals were everywhere. I tried stepping on them, crushing them under my boot, but they left a sticky layer that clung to the soles. The scent was oppressive. It made my head hurt. I cursed under my breath and backed away. I asked a gardening friend for advice. I described the plant, its rapid growth, and the sweet smell. He looked confused, said he never heard of such a plant. I showed him a photo I took on my phone. He shook his head. "No idea," he said. "Maybe it's some invasive species. Try using a strong herbicide." I thanked him and bought a bottle of a potent weed killer. That evening, I sprayed the plant thoroughly. The leaves glistened with the chemical. I felt a twinge of guilt, but I had no choice. It had taken over my garden, and I couldn't even enjoy watering my other plants. The next morning, I found the garden covered entirely in those pinkish leaves and petals. The sweet smell hit me like a wall when I opened the back door. I coughed and covered my nose with my sleeve. The herbicide did nothing. In fact, the plant looked healthier, greener, and more spread out. It climbed up the back fence now. My lavender and roses were barely visible. I tried cutting a path through it, swinging a pair of long-handled loppers, but each cut released a cloud of that heavy scent, making me dizzy. I backed off, panting. At night, I dreamed about walking through the garden, following a trail of petals under a pale moon. The smell filled my lungs. In the dream, I saw a figure moving between the leaves, but I never caught a clear view. I woke up sweating. I rubbed my face, telling myself it was just stress. By the next day, the plant was not just in the garden, but creeping onto my porch. It spread along the steps. The sweet smell drifted into my kitchen window if I left it open. I kept it shut and turned on a fan, trying to clear the air. The plant grew so fast I could almost see it moving if I stared long enough. I tried recording it with my phone, setting it on a time lapse. When I played it back, I saw the leaves shifting, growing, covering inches of ground in a short period. It made my stomach churn. I decided to hire professional help. I called a local landscaping company. They came the following morning. 2 workers looked at the plant, puzzled. They tried to chop it down, dig it up, and bag it. They wore masks to avoid inhaling the smell. They worked for hours, hauling away trash bags full of leaves and roots. After they finished, my garden looked bare and torn up, but at least the plant was gone. I paid them, thanked them, and watched them drive off. The next day, the plant returned, thicker than ever. It now formed a low canopy over the entire garden, with flowers blooming everywhere. The petals made a soft carpet that squished under my feet. The smell was so intense I felt like gagging. My eyes watered constantly. I tried breathing through a damp cloth, but it didn't help much. I felt trapped in my own home. A few days later, I noticed something else. Late at night, I saw movement outside. I turned on the porch light. The leaves rustled, though there was no wind. I heard a faint sound, like soft steps on the petals. I called out, "Who's there?" No reply. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it over the garden. The leaves shifted. I thought I saw a shape crouching behind the vines. I stepped forward, but the smell hit me hard, making me dizzy. I stumbled back inside and locked the door. I didn't sleep well that night. The following afternoon, I found the plant had extended under the fence into my neighbor's yard. They would notice soon. I called them and warned them. They came to look. They stared, speechless. I could see the worry on their faces. They said they would try removing it on their side. By evening, they gave up. The plant resisted every attempt. It just regrew, thicker and stronger. I tried fire next. Carefully, I used a small propane torch on a patch of leaves, hoping to burn it away. The leaves sizzled, releasing a sharper scent that made me cough violently. A small flame caught, but the leaves seemed too moist to burn properly. I gave up after a few minutes, eyes red and throat sore. Weeks passed. The plant dominated my backyard and spread beyond. The smell grew worse each day. I barely went outside. When I did, I wore a mask and goggles. The petals coated everything. They piled up against the house walls. My other plants died, choked by the invasive growth. Even my herbs disappeared under the green blanket. I felt helpless and angry. At one point, I tried calling environmental authorities. They thought I was joking or exaggerating. They said they were too busy to handle a single garden issue. I had no proof this was some known invasive species. I was on my own. I stayed indoors most days. I could smell the sweetness even through closed windows. It gave me headaches. Sometimes I dreamt of footsteps in the garden at night, soft whispers I couldn't understand. I woke with a sore throat each morning. Finally, I decided to abandon the fight. I stopped going into the backyard. I stopped watering anything. I kept the windows sealed. The plant grew unchecked. Through a gap in the blinds, I saw it swaying gently, leaves overlapping my window frame. It blotted out the view of the fence and the trees beyond. The garden became a dense mass of pink petals and green vines. One morning, I tried to open the back door just to check the situation. I couldn't. The vines had grown against it, sealing it shut. I pushed hard, but it barely budged. The sweet smell seeped in through cracks. My kitchen felt humid and stale. I coughed and stepped back. I made a decision to leave. I packed my belongings over the next few days, staying mostly in the front of the house. I didn't want to live like this anymore. The plant had taken over. Before leaving, I took one last look from the front yard. I walked around the side of the house and peered over the fence. I saw an ocean of green leaves and pink petals, shimmering in the sunlight. The smell drifted over to me, making me gag. I backed away and turned to leave. As I drove off, I saw the neighbor's yard also showing patches of that plant creeping along the ground. I wondered if it would spread to the whole block. I felt no relief, just exhaustion. My garden, once a place I enjoyed, had turned into a nightmare. I never found out what that plant was or how it got there. I only knew I couldn't stop it. It just kept growing, stronger each time I fought back. It left me with nothing but a bitter memory of sweet smell and sticky petals. I never returned to that house. First heard the doorbell around 2 in the morning. It was a Monday night, and I had been living in that house for about a month. I remember waking up confused. The ring was clear and loud, like someone pressing the button on my front porch. I turned on my bedside lamp and checked the time. 2:03 a.m. I got out of bed, walked down the hallway, and looked through the peephole. No one there. I turned on the porch light, opened the door carefully, and stepped outside. The street was empty and quiet. The only sound was a distant hum of the old street light flickering down the block. I locked the door and went back to bed, thinking maybe it was a prank. The next night, the doorbell rang again at 2 a.m. sharp. This time, I jumped out of bed and ran straight to the door. I yanked it open, expecting to catch someone running away. No one was there. The sidewalk was empty. I stepped onto the porch, looked left and right, not a soul. I felt my neck tighten. I rubbed my eyes, trying to see better in the dim light. Nothing. I waited a full minute, barefoot on the porch, feeling a slight chill. Still nothing. I went inside, locked the door, and stood in the dark living room, listening. No more rings that night. On the third night, it happened again at 2 a.m. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. I felt annoyed and a bit scared. I decided to set up a camera outside the next day. I had a small security camera I could angle toward the porch. I needed to see who was doing this. The next morning, I attached the camera to the window inside my living room, pointing at the front door area. It had a motion sensor and night vision. I tested it, watched the feed on my phone. It seemed fine. That night, I tried to stay awake, sitting in the living room, watching TV with the volume low. Around 1:50 a.m., I turned off the TV and waited. At exactly 2 a.m., the doorbell rang. I jumped, grabbed my phone, and checked the camera feed. Nothing on the screen, just the static image of the front porch. No movement, no figure. I paused the recording and replayed it. The only odd thing was the flickering streetlight. Each time the bell rang, the light outside seemed to flicker slightly, but there was no one at the door. I got up, went to the door, opened it slowly, peeked outside. Still no one. I felt my heart beating harder. I stepped onto the porch and looked back at the camera in the window. It was recording me. Good. I looked around again. The empty street, the silent trees, a faint breeze. Nothing. I went back inside, feeling unsettled. The next day I checked the recorded footage in detail. At 2 a.m., the doorbell sound was clear on the audio, but the video showed nothing unusual except that flickering streetlight. I considered the possibility of a short circuit in the bell wiring, but why always at 2 a.m.? I decided to replace the doorbell's batteries and wiring, just in case. I bought new components and installed them. The doorbell worked normally during the day. That night, I went to bed early. I set an alarm for 1:45 a.m. I wanted to be ready. When the alarm woke me, I sat up in bed, fully alert, waiting. Exactly at 2 a.m., the bell rang. I jumped out of bed, ran outside instantly. No one there. I cursed under my breath and felt my hands shaking slightly. I checked the wiring on the doorbell box by the door. It looked fine. I pressed the bell myself, and it rang normally. I pulled the plug on the chime unit inside the house just to see what would happen tomorrow. The next night I left the chime unit unplugged. At 2 a.m. I heard a ring anyway. It sounded exactly like before. My skin prickled. I knew the chime wasn't connected. How was it ringing? I got up, ran to the hallway, and heard the ring again from the living room. I stepped inside the living room, listening. It seemed to come from the front door area again. I checked the camera feed. Nothing. I tried turning on every light. I yanked open the front door, waving my flashlight. No one. I slammed the door, annoyed and scared. I paced the living room, my heart pounding, trying to calm down. The following day, I decided to wait outside on the porch at 2 a.m. Maybe I could catch whoever it was. That night, I sat on a chair in the dark porch around 1:50 a.m. I wore a jacket and kept a small flashlight in my hand. I waited, listening to distant traffic and the soft hum of the streetlight. At 2 a.m., the doorbell rang. But this time, it sounded like it came from inside the house. I whipped around, confused. I was outside, near the button, and I heard the bell behind the door. I rushed back in, expecting to find someone inside. I turned on all the lights, checked every room. Empty. Just me and that hollow silence. I felt my throat tighten. I shivered, even though it wasn't cold. Over the next few nights, the bell kept ringing at 2 a.m., but now it seemed to move. Some nights it rang in the kitchen, sometimes in the bedroom, sometimes in the attic where I barely went. I followed the sound around, flipping on lights, opening closets, checking under tables. Always nothing. The sound was always clear and loud, but never any device. I even turned off the main electrical breaker in the house before midnight one night. No power at all. At 2 a.m., the bell rang again, echoing in the dark house. I stood there with a flashlight, heart pounding, feeling sweat on my forehead. No electricity, yet the bell rang. I started sleeping less. I dreaded 2 a.m. Each time I would wake up a bit before it, feeling tense and alert, waiting for the bell. It never failed. Always at 2 a.m., sharp. I tried recording audio inside the house. The recordings caught the bell sound, but no explanation. No static, no voices, just the ring. I asked a neighbor if they heard anything strange at night. They said no, just the usual quiet. I didn't mention the bell. I didn't want them to think I was crazy. I considered leaving the house, staying at a friend's place, but part of me refused to run away. I wanted to solve this. I spent afternoons checking the walls, looking for hidden devices or old wiring. Nothing unusual. The bell was a wireless unit. With the power off, it shouldn't work at all, yet it did. One night, I tried something different. I stood in the center of the living room at 1:59 a.m., holding my breath. When the bell rang at 2 a.m., I tried to move toward the sound immediately. It rang again from the hallway. I rushed there. Then it rang from the kitchen. I sprinted over, bumping my shoulder on the door frame. My heart was racing. I smelled my own sweat. The bell rang again from the bedroom. I dashed back, feeling my legs shake. The sound kept moving, as if leading me in circles around the house. By the time it stopped, I was panting, exhausted. It rang about 6 times that night, each time from a different room. I fell into a chair, shaking my head. I felt a lump in my throat. This was not normal. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? They would find nothing. No intruder, no device. As days passed, I started feeling uneasy in my own home. I avoided looking at clocks near 2 a.m. I knew it would come anyway. The bell became louder, or maybe I was just more sensitive. Some nights, it sounded like it was right next to my ear. I flinched each time, feeling a jolt in my chest. My sleep suffered. I got headaches. I tried earplugs, headphones, music. Nothing blocked that sound. I tried talking to the empty rooms, asking who was there, what they wanted. Silence. I tried writing a note and leaving it on the kitchen table. No response. The bell just kept ringing. I felt my nerves fraying. I considered moving out, even though I had barely lived here a month. But I had put money into this place. I liked it before all this started. I wondered if the previous owner knew something. I searched the house for old documents or clues. In a closet, I found a small box with letters from decades ago. Nothing strange, just old correspondence. I checked the attic more thoroughly, found dusty furniture and boxes of junk. Nothing that explained a phantom doorbell. The next few nights, the bell's behavior changed. Instead of multiple rings, it would ring once at 2 a.m. and then go silent. But the sound grew harsher, more jarring. It startled me so badly one night that I dropped a glass of water. The crash made me yell. I stood barefoot on broken glass, afraid to move, my heart racing. Once I cleaned up the mess, I sat in the kitchen, numb, staring at the dark window. On another night, I tried leaving the front door wide open at 2 a.m., hoping whoever rang would appear. The bell rang anyway, this time from the back of the house. I ran to the backyard door. No one was there, just empty darkness. I screamed out loud, "What do you want from me?" My voice sounded shaky. No answer, just silence. I called an electrician to check the wiring in the house. He came during the day, tested everything, found nothing wrong. I watched him closely, hoping he'd find some hidden speaker or old circuit. He said everything looked normal. I didn't mention the midnight bell. I just thanked him and paid him. When he left, I felt alone and lost. One night I decided to stay awake all night, sitting in a chair with a flashlight and a baseball bat. At 2 a.m., the bell rang twice, sounding like it came from the ceiling. I banged the bat on the wall in frustration. The sound made no difference. I spent the rest of the night sitting there, tense, waiting. Nothing else happened until dawn. As the weeks passed, I began to accept that I had no control. The bell would ring every night at 2 a.m., no matter what I did. Whether I waited outside, turned off the power, or unplugged the chime, it didn't matter. Sometimes I tried ignoring it, staying in bed and pretending not to care. But each ring made me flinch. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears. My skin tingled with fear. I noticed a pattern. When I tried to confront the sound, it moved around more, ringing multiple times in different rooms. When I ignored it, it rang once or twice, then stopped. I started choosing the easier path, just lying still in bed, covering my ears with a pillow, waiting for it to end. Still, sleep was hard afterward. I would lie awake for hours, anxious and angry. I thought about leaving the house permanently. One afternoon I started packing some boxes, but I hesitated. I had invested in this home. I had nowhere else to go easily. I told myself maybe it would stop one day. Maybe I would just learn to live with it. That thought made me feel sick, but I couldn't find a solution. On a whim, I tried disconnecting the doorbell button outside completely, removing the batteries, taking the entire mechanism off the wall. I left a hole in the siding. That night at 2 a.m., the bell rang anyway. It sounded clearer than ever, as if mocking my efforts. I threw the button in the trash the next morning. I tried sleeping in a different room, the guest bedroom at the back of the house. At 2 a.m., the bell rang. It sounded closer now, right outside the guest room door. I pulled the blanket over my head, trembling, my lungs tight. Eventually, it stopped. Over time, I reached a grim acceptance. The bell was part of my life now. It had no visible source. It defied logic. I stopped checking for intruders. I stopped trying to record or outsmart it. I just lay in bed, waiting for that nightly ring at 2 a.m. Sometimes it rang once, sometimes a few times, sometimes moving around the house. I learned not to chase it, not to call out. I learned to keep still, let it happen, and then try to sleep afterward. My routine changed. I went to bed earlier, tried to get extra rest before the bell. I turned on a fan or white noise, though it never covered the sound. At least it helped me feel less alone in the silence. Months passed, and I remained in the house. The doorbell continued to ring every night at 2 a.m. Nothing I tried made it stop. I considered having friends stay over, but I didn't want them to think I was losing my mind. Without proof, who would believe this story? I never found an explanation. I never found a hidden device or saw a person. The sound just existed, every night, unconnected to anything I could understand. In time, I learned to live with the fear. It never stopped being frightening, never stopped making my heart pound, but I adapted. I knew it would come, and I knew it would go. That's all I can say. The bell still rings at 2 a.m., and I still don't know why. I still wake up tense, still check the dark hallway, still feel my skin crawl at the sound. But I live here. This is my home, and the bell, for whatever reason, is part of it. I have no choice but to endure. I first noticed the shadowless person on a hot afternoon in the city. I was on my usual route home, walking along a crowded sidewalk. The sun was bright, and everyone cast sharp shadows on the pavement, except this one figure. He stood at a distance, near the corner of a building, blending in with the crowd at first. But something caught my eye. He had no shadow. I remember stopping to squint, thinking maybe the angle of the sun played a trick. I stepped forward, changed my position. Everyone else had a shadow, but not him. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I tried not to stare. I moved on, pretending nothing was wrong. I glanced back once. He was still there, the same distance away, as if mirroring my steps. I felt uneasy. I walked faster, weaving through people. When I turned around again, I saw him on the other side of the street, still shadowless, still watching me. I couldn't see his face clearly, just his outline and his clothes. He wore a plain jacket and jeans, nothing special. But the lack of a shadow made my stomach tighten. That night, I tried to forget about it. I told myself I must have imagined it. The next morning, I took a different route. The streets were just as busy. I glanced around casually. There he was again, standing by a bus stop, no shadow beneath his feet. I pressed my lips together and walked on, pretending not to notice. My heart beat faster. Each time I looked back, he maintained the same distance. He never got closer or farther, just stayed behind, blending in, without a shadow. After a week of this, I decided to do something. One afternoon, I waited until I reached a less crowded spot. Then I turned around abruptly and strode right toward him. I pushed past a couple of people, ignoring their curses. I kept my eyes on him. As I got closer, he moved behind a parked van. I rushed around it, but he was gone. Just like that. I looked down at the ground, checking the shadows of every person nearby. All normal. He disappeared completely. I stood there, breathing hard, confused and angry. That evening, a storm rolled in. The streets turned wet and shiny under the dim streetlights. I hurried home under my umbrella. The rain was heavy, and puddles formed everywhere. Halfway home, I noticed footprints on the wet sidewalk behind me. I froze. The footprints followed mine exactly. I looked over my shoulder. No one there. The footprints were fresh, forming as if someone stepped behind me at the exact moment I stepped forward. I took a slow step. Another wet footprint appeared behind me, splashing slightly. I felt panic rise in my chest. I swung my umbrella backward, hitting empty air. No resistance. But the footprints continued to follow. I ran. The rain pounded on my umbrella. My shoes splashed in puddles. The footprints splashed too, right behind, matching my speed. I didn't dare look back again. I rushed through the dark streets, turning corners at random, hoping to lose whatever followed me. The sound of rain masked all other noises, but I swore I heard faint breathing near my ear. When I finally reached my apartment building, I fumbled with my keys, panting. I kicked the door shut behind me and leaned against it, heart racing. Once inside, I dried off, changed clothes, tried to calm down. After a few minutes, I peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I exhaled. Maybe it ended. I tried to sleep, but my mind kept replaying the footprints. In the morning, I left the building early. I checked outside my door. The hallway floor was dry. No prints. Good. I headed down to the street, looking around carefully. Everything seemed normal. But after work that day, as I approached my building entrance again, I saw a line of wet footprints on the sidewalk outside, as if someone had walked there recently, even though the weather was now sunny and dry. I looked up and down the street. No water source, no recent rain, yet there were damp footprints leading directly to my building door. My hands shook as I got my keys. I stepped inside quickly. I told myself to ignore it, to calm down. Maybe a pipe leaked somewhere, but deep down, I knew better. Over the next few days, I kept seeing him, always at a distance, always without a shadow. He never rushed at me, never spoke, never touched me. He just hovered in the background, appearing in crowds, sometimes across the street, sometimes reflected in shop windows without a shadow on the floor. I couldn't predict when he would appear. When I tried to confront him, he vanished again, turning a corner or hiding behind something. It made my skin crawl. I felt watched at all times. I started avoiding crowded places, thinking maybe I could catch him if fewer people were around. But even in quieter streets, whenever I turned around, he stood far off, no shadow. If I tried to rush him, he slipped away as before. I felt like I was losing my grip. Nights became worse. I dreamed of wet footprints trailing me through empty alleys. I woke up sweaty and tense. One afternoon, I noticed something else disturbing. I was walking under bright sunlight, checking people's shadows without being too obvious. At some point, I looked down at my own shadow. It was faint and odd, as if not fully formed. I shook my head, thinking it was just the angle of the sun. The next day I checked again. My shadow seemed lighter, less distinct. On the third day, I couldn't find my shadow at all. I stood in direct sunlight, looked down, and saw nothing, just bare pavement. I moved my arm up and down, expecting at least a blur of shade. Nothing. I pressed my back against a wall and looked down again. Everyone else had a shadow. I did not. My chest tightened. I rubbed my eyes and tried again. Still no shadow. I stepped around, changed angles, stood next to someone else, saw their shadow clearly but not mine. I felt dizzy. I remembered the shadowless figure. Was he taking my shadow somehow? The idea sounded insane, but I had no other explanation. I hurried home, avoiding eye contact with anyone, feeling like a freak. Inside my apartment, I tried using artificial light. I turned on a bright lamp and stood in front of it. No shadow on the wall. I waved my hand. Nothing. My body cast no shadow. I touched my arm, my face. I felt solid. I looked in the mirror. My reflection was there, normal, but no shadow behind me. Just my reflection floating without the dark outline we all have when standing against a light source. Panic rose in my throat. I felt tears welling up. I was losing something essential, something normal people always have. I felt marked, singled out by that man with no shadow. Did he do this to me? Was I becoming like him? That evening, I searched the streets for him, desperate to get answers. I wandered up and down blocks, scanning for a figure without a shadow. The sun was low, making everyone's shadow stretch long on the ground, except mine, except his, if he appeared. I walked until my legs ached, but didn't see him. I saw many strangers, all with shadows, all normal. My head pounded. The next day I tried talking to a friend about it. I didn't mention the shadowless man. I just said, "Hey, do I look strange to you?" My friend looked at me oddly, said I looked fine, maybe a bit tired. I stepped into a patch of sunlight and asked, "Do you see my shadow?" He frowned, looked down and said, "Of course I can," pointing at the ground. I followed his finger. I saw nothing there, but he insisted it was right there. I realized he couldn't see what I saw. To him, I still had a shadow. To me, it was gone. That made my stomach turn. I forced a laugh and changed the subject. So other people saw my shadow, but I didn't. The absence was only for me. I tried taking photos of myself in bright light. The photos showed a normal shadow. I looked at the photo on my phone screen, saw a shadowed figure behind me. I looked down at the ground in real life, saw nothing. This was madness. Reality seemed split. My senses told me I had no shadow, but cameras and other people said I did. I stopped sleeping well. Each night I lay awake, thinking about the man without a shadow. Maybe he was never real. Maybe I imagined him. But he felt real. The wet footprints, the silent presence, the way he always kept the same distance. I decided to wait near the spot I saw him first. I arrived early, around midday, stood against a wall, and watched. For hours, I kept scanning the area. Finally, near the end of the day, I spotted him across the street, leaning near a mailbox, watching me. I took a deep breath and approached slowly, not running this time. I crossed the street carefully, keeping my eyes locked on him. He didn't move. He just watched. As I got closer, I saw his face was blurred by the sunlight, as if my eyes couldn't focus. I tried to speak. My voice trembled. "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer. I was about 10 steps away when he turned and walked around the corner of a building. I followed immediately, heart pounding. I reached the corner and found an empty alley. No exits, nowhere to hide. He was gone. I kicked the wall, frustrated. I shouted, "Come back!" My voice echoed. No reply. That night, I woke to a soft tapping sound outside my bedroom window. I got up, opened the curtains. Nothing there, but the streetlight cast a glow, and I saw faint wet footprints on the sidewalk below. No rain that night, just those footprints leading nowhere. I closed the curtains, feeling exposed. For the next few days, I saw him less often. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of him in a reflection or on the opposite side of a plaza, but he always slipped away. Meanwhile, my sense of having no shadow persisted. I hated walking in sunlight because it reminded me of the absence I perceived. Everyone else saw me as normal, but I knew something was off. I tried ignoring the whole thing, going about my life. One evening, as I walked home, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around. The street was nearly empty. I stood under a street lamp. I looked down at my feet. Still no shadow in my eyes. I took a step. I heard another step behind me, but saw no one. I took another step, heard a matching step. I spun around, shining my phone's flashlight. Empty space. My heart hammered. I said aloud, "Leave me alone." My voice cracked. The echo died. No answer. I hurried inside my building, slammed the door to my apartment, and leaned against it, breathing fast. Then I realized something. All these experiences were pushing me toward fear, isolation, and confusion. I was reacting exactly how someone would if they were being stalked by an invisible presence. Maybe that was the point. Maybe he wanted me to be afraid. I decided to try a different approach. I would act as if I didn't care, as if he meant nothing. I would not run, not chase, not show fear. The next day, I walked calmly through the streets. I didn't look for him. I didn't check my shadow. I just walked. I grabbed coffee at a cafe, read a newspaper. I went to a park and sat on a bench. I felt eyes on me. I knew he was somewhere nearby, but I didn't look. I stayed calm, drank my coffee, looked at the trees. After a while, I stood up and headed home. That night, I slept better. No tapping at the window, no footprints. The next morning, I glanced at my shadow on the ground. I still saw nothing, but it bothered me less. I pretended it didn't matter. Days passed. I spotted him once or twice at a distance, but I didn't panic. I continued ignoring him. After a week, I stopped seeing him altogether. No more footprints, no more strange sightings. Slowly, my perception of having no shadow faded. One day, I stepped into bright sunlight and looked down. I thought I saw a faint outline this time. Another week later, my shadow looked normal to me again. I sighed with relief. By the time a month passed, the memory felt distant. I couldn't fully explain what happened. I considered that maybe stress or exhaustion caused me to imagine things, or maybe it was something else entirely. But the shadowless man never returned. My shadow remained intact. I went on with my life. If I learned anything, it was that panicking made it worse. Ignoring his presence seemed to break whatever hold he had. Now, when I walk the streets, I sometimes check people's shadows. I see them all, long and dark. I see mine too, a normal shape on the pavement. If I ever spot someone without a shadow again, I know what to do. I won't chase or confront. I will just carry on, refusing to give fear any power. That's the only way I manage to get back to normal. I first noticed the closet door problem a few weeks after moving in. My bedroom was small, with just a bed, a dresser, and a built-in closet. The closet had a single wooden door with a simple knob. On my first night, I remember closing it fully because I don't like sleeping with open closet doors. The next morning, the door stood slightly open, maybe an inch. I thought I had just not closed it properly. I shrugged it off and went about my day. That evening, I pushed the door firmly shut before going to bed. I even heard the latch click. The following morning it was open again, the same small gap. I frowned, feeling a bit annoyed. I checked the hinges, the latch, everything. It all seemed fine. The door wasn't warped. I figured maybe there was a draft or something pushing it open. The next night, I placed a heavy box in front of the door. It was filled with books and definitely not easy to move. I pushed the door closed tight and slid the box right up against it. In the morning, I found the door partially open again, with the box nudged aside by a few inches. I stood there, mouth slightly open, staring. My heart kicked a bit. How did that happen? I tried to stay logical. Maybe I pushed the box at an angle, and it slid on the floorboards during the night. I tested the floor with my foot, checking how slippery it was. Not very. Still, I wanted a better explanation. I decided to record it. I set up my old phone on a bookshelf, pointing it at the closet. I left it recording overnight. In the morning, I played back the footage. The image was a bit grainy in the low light, but I could see the closet door clearly. Around 3 a.m., it began to open slowly, like someone was gently pulling it from inside. The door moved, but I saw no hand, no figure, no shadow. It just opened. The box slid quietly aside as if pushed by the door or something behind it. Yet there was no visible force. I heard no sound on the recording except a slight creak from the hinges. I felt a chill under my skin. I rubbed my arms and replayed the video a few times, always the same. The door opened by itself. No person, no identifiable reason. I tried something else. I stuck a piece of tape over the gap between the door and the frame. If the door moved, the tape would tear. That night I slept poorly, half expecting to hear something. I heard nothing unusual. In the morning the door was opened slightly again, and the tape was ripped cleanly down the middle. Inside the closet was dark, the clothing hanging still. At that point, I started feeling uneasy in my own bedroom. I told myself maybe the latch was loose or the frame misaligned, but that wouldn't explain the tape being torn or the heavy box moved. I grabbed a flashlight and inspected the inside of the closet carefully. It was mostly clothes, a few boxes on the shelf, a suitcase on the floor. The back wall was solid, no secret doors. The floor was dusty in the corners. I noticed a faint scuff mark on the wood floor, like something had been dragged. It led into the closet's interior, just a short line, and then stopped. I had never noticed it before. It looked recent. I tried wiping it with my finger, but it was more like a slight scratch. Something had scraped along the floor. I felt a tightness in my chest. I checked behind the hanging clothes, just a wall. I moved the suitcase, nothing behind it. Everything looked normal except for that mark and the strange door behavior. I decided to push the door shut again and lean hard on it, testing the latch. I gave it a strong push to make sure it stayed closed. Just as I did, I heard a muffled thump from inside the closet. I jumped back, heart racing. My hand trembled slightly. I stood still, listening. Nothing else, just silence and my own breathing. I opened the door a crack, shining my flashlight inside. Everything looked the same, no explanation. I tried slamming the door shut again. Another muffled sound, like something hitting the inside wall. I felt sweat on my palms. I backed away and left the closet half open, not wanting to provoke more noises. From that night on, I avoided touching the closet door more than necessary. I let it stay slightly open if it wanted to. I tried not to think about it, but I started feeling watched. Each time I entered the bedroom, I felt like something was peeking from that dark gap. When I lay in bed, I could see the door in my peripheral vision. I kept imagining eyes in the darkness between the door and the frame. I rearranged my furniture so the bed faced away from the closet. That helped a bit, but I still knew it was there, behind me. Sometimes, late at night, I swore I heard faint creaks from that side of the room. Not the usual house-settling sounds, but soft, deliberate creaks, like weight shifting on floorboards. After a few nights of poor sleep, I decided to record again, this time with a better camera and some light. I installed a small nightlight near the closet, just enough glow to see movement. I let the camera run and tried to sleep. It took me hours to drift off. I kept staring at the faint glow around the closet door, waiting for it to move. Eventually, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. In the morning, I watched the footage. For hours, nothing happened. Then, around 2:30 a.m., the door opened again, slowly as before. But this time, in the faint light, I caught something odd. For a brief moment, as the door opened, I saw the hanging clothes sway slightly, as if disturbed by a movement inside. No figure appeared on camera, just the movement of fabric. My heart sank. Something was in there, pushing the clothes aside. I paused the frame and studied it closely. Just clothes, moving gently, then settling. No hand, no shape I could identify, but definitely movement. I replayed it multiple times, feeling my throat tighten. I felt violated, unsafe. Something was inside my closet at night, moving around, opening the door, and I couldn't see it. I considered calling someone, maybe a friend, to stay over. But what would I say? My closet door opens by itself, and I think something invisible is inside. They would think I was either lying or imagining things. I thought about calling the landlord, asking if there was some weird structural issue. But what could he do? I tried a different tactic. I moved all my clothes out of the closet. I placed them in boxes in the corner of the room. I left the closet empty except for the suitcase and a few empty hangers. If something moved inside, I would see it more clearly. That night, I recorded again. In the morning, I checked the footage. This time, when the door opened around 3 a.m., there was a faint scraping sound on the audio. The hangers swung slightly, clinking softly. The suitcase shifted an inch. I could see it on camera. The suitcase just scooted forward a tiny bit, like nudged by a foot or a knee, but nothing was visible doing it. I felt my stomach churn. Something was physically interacting with objects inside my closet, yet I could not see it. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom. I moved a mattress to the living room floor and tried sleeping there. It helped a bit. I felt safer farther away from that door, but I knew I had to deal with it eventually. I couldn't just ignore my bedroom forever. One afternoon, I approached the closet with a crowbar in hand, feeling a bit ridiculous. I thought maybe I could remove the door entirely, take it off the hinges. If there was no door, maybe no weird activity. I touched the hinges, trying to see if they were easy to remove. As I did, the doorknob rattled slightly. I jumped back, heart pounding. The door just rattled on its own, a slight shake. I froze, holding my breath. After a few seconds, it stopped. I decided against taking the door off that day. I felt too nervous. Instead, I left the house and took a long walk. I needed fresh air, needed to calm down. While walking, I tried to think logically. Could this be some kind of animal getting in from outside? But I saw no holes, no sign of pests. Could it be a prank? Someone hiding in a secret compartment? But the closet's back wall seemed solid, and I lived alone on the second floor of a secure building. That night, I sat in front of the closet, the door slightly open, and talked softly. I said, "What do you want?" I felt stupid, but I had to try. Silence. I tried again. "If something is there, give me a sign." I waited, listening to my own heartbeat. Nothing. I reached for the knob, prepared to shut it firmly. The moment I touched the knob, I heard that muffled thump again inside. My hand jerked away. My throat tightened, and I backed off. Over the next week, I tried ignoring it. The door kept opening slightly at night, but I avoided watching the recordings. I just wanted to live in denial for a while. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Whenever I entered the bedroom, I felt a pressure, as if eyes were on my back. When I slept in the living room, I sometimes woke up feeling that same presence. After a sleepless night, I decided to try one last thing: completely empty the closet and wedge it shut from the outside with something stronger than a box. I brought a heavy wooden chair from the kitchen. I emptied the closet fully, leaving it bare. Nothing inside now. I closed the door, wedged the chair under the doorknob, and pushed a small dresser against it. If the door opened now, it would have to move the dresser and chair. I slept in the living room again. In the morning, I found the dresser slightly shifted, the chair knocked over, and the closet door ajar. My legs went weak. I had blocked it physically, and still it opened. This was impossible. My eyes watered from anxiety. I felt truly helpless. I realized I had to accept the situation. Something lived in that closet space that I couldn't see or understand. I thought about moving out, but I just moved in and had nowhere else to go easily. Rent wasn't cheap. Maybe I could live with it if I just stopped antagonizing it. Let the door open as it wished, never fully shut it, never try to block it. Maybe it would stop making noise if I respected its territory. I returned the clothes to the closet, neatly arranged. I left the door slightly open at all times, making sure it didn't feel trapped. I stopped recording. I stopped placing boxes or chairs. I made a point of not slamming it shut. Over the next few days, the noises became less frequent. The door still opened a bit more at night, but only slightly. I didn't hear the muffled thumps anymore. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Each morning, the door stood at the same slight angle, as if someone peeked out overnight and then stayed still at dawn. I avoided looking directly inside. I dressed quickly and left the room. At night, I kept a dim lamp on, so I wouldn't wake up in total darkness with that door gaping. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye, like the clothes shifting, but I never checked too closely. Over time, I learned to live with it. I told myself that if it wanted to harm me, it would have done so already. It seemed content to just exist there, behind the door, making sure it was never fully closed. I followed its rule. I never slammed it shut again, never tried to lock it, never recorded it. In return, it stayed quiet, only opening the door a tiny bit each night. No more dragging noises, no muffled sounds. I still felt tense every time I entered that bedroom, but at least I could sleep there again. I kept my bed facing away from the closet. I tried not to think too hard about what might be inside. I avoided telling anyone. Who would believe me? Now, months later, I still live here. The closet door remains slightly open at all times. I don't dare close it completely. I have become used to it. Sometimes I feel that silent gaze from within, but I pretend I don't notice. I go about my day, dress quietly, and leave the room. At night, I sleep lightly, always aware of the door behind me. I don't know what it is or why it's here. All I know is that it wants that door open. I give it that, and it leaves me in peace. I have learned that some things are best left alone. I won't try to understand or provoke it again. The closet door can stay as it is. I will just live with the uneasy truce we have established. I first noticed the book problem a few months ago. I had just moved into a small apartment near my new job. I placed my books in neat order on a shelf by the living room window. It was nothing fancy, just a few mystery novels, some old textbooks, and a couple of worn paperbacks I'd picked up at a thrift store. Everything looked normal. On the second morning in the apartment, I found one particular book out of place. I remember it clearly because it was an old hardcover mystery novel I never actually read. I had placed it between two textbooks at the far right of the middle shelf. Now it lay flat on top of the others, as if someone had picked it up and set it down carelessly. I frowned, thinking maybe I had misplaced it the day before. I put it back, shrugged, and went to work. The next day, the same book was misplaced again, now on the opposite end of the shelf. I knew I hadn't touched it since the day before. My stomach tightened slightly. I thought maybe I had a lousy memory or I'd bumped the shelf somehow. I repositioned the book neatly, and double-checked everything before leaving for work. On the third morning, I found the book on the coffee table. That was impossible to ignore. I had come home late the previous night, gone straight to bed, and never touched the shelves. Yet here was the same hard cover, lying in the center of my coffee table. My chest felt tight. I looked around the living room, checking the windows and door. Everything was locked. No sign of forced entry. I had no roommates. I stood there, heart pounding, feeling uneasy. I put the book back on the shelf and decided to set a little trap. I placed a small piece of tape under the book's spine on the shelf, so if someone moved it, the tape would fall. I also took photos of the shelf with my phone, making sure I knew the exact positions of everything. That night, I slept lightly, listening for sounds. I heard nothing unusual. In the morning, I rushed to check the shelf. The book was gone again. The tape lay on the floor. I found the book on my kitchen counter this time. My mouth went dry. I flipped through the pages, looking for something unusual. Nothing, just old yellowed pages. I placed it back on the shelf and tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. I felt watched. Over the next few days, other books started shifting places. It wasn't just the hardcover mystery. Now, a paperback travel guide would appear on the armchair, or a textbook would lie open on my desk. Sometimes I found notes written on scraps of paper tucked inside the pages. They weren't there before. The notes were single sentences, simple instructions. Read this page, or look outside now. The handwriting was neat and small, not mine. When I found the first note, I panicked. I checked my door lock, my windows. Everything was secure. I searched every corner of the apartment, under the bed, inside closets, behind curtains. No one was there. I tried ignoring the notes at first. I tossed them in the trash. But the next morning, I'd find a new note in a different book. One night, I placed a small camera on a shelf opposite the bookcase, aimed at the books. It was a cheap webcam connected to my laptop, set to record all night. If someone was coming in, I'd catch them. I went to bed feeling tense. In the morning, I played back the footage. For hours, nothing happened. Then around 2 a.m., a book slid out of the shelf on its own. No hand, no person, just the book moving forward and dropping onto the floor. It was slow and deliberate. After it fell, the pages flipped on their own, like an invisible finger turning them. My breathing grew shallow as I watched. The pages stopped flipping, and the book lay still for a minute. Then it rose, as if lifted by invisible hands, and floated toward the coffee table out of frame. I paused the video, heart pounding. I wiped sweat off my forehead. This was impossible. I replayed it, the same thing, a book moving by itself. My stomach twisted, and I felt a headache coming on. I considered leaving the apartment, but I had a lease and not much money. Where would I go? That day at work, I struggled to focus. I kept seeing the image of the book floating. After work, I bought a few more cameras, better ones, to place around the living room. I also left a small light on, so the footage would be clearer. That night, I recorded again, though I doubted it would help me understand. In the morning, I watched the new footage. This time, I saw the hardcover mystery book lift off the shelf, hover in midair, and then slam down on my desk. A pen rolled off the desk as if startled. I saw no visible figure, just the book moving on its own. Then a page turned, and a note appeared. The note must have been placed before, but I never saw it. It floated out from between the pages and drifted to the floor. I paused the video and zoomed in. I saw the note's words faintly. "Listen next time." I felt dizzy. Something was in my apartment, manipulating my books, leaving messages, something I couldn't see. I didn't know what to do. Calling the police made no sense. They'd never believe this. I had no friends nearby, having just moved. I thought about calling my family, but stopped. They would think I was having a breakdown. I decided to follow the instructions in the notes. The next time I found a note in a book, it said, "Read page 57. The book was an old mystery novel, not the hardcover one, but another. I opened page 57, hands shaking. There was a circled paragraph mentioning a key hidden behind a painting in a fictional house. Just a story detail. Confused, I checked the walls of my apartment. I had no paintings, nothing hidden there. I felt stupid. The following night I tried talking aloud. I stood in front of the bookshelf and said, "What do you want?" My voice sounded shaky in the silence. Nothing responded. I felt silly talking to an empty room. I turned to walk away and heard a faint rustle of pages. I spun back, saw a book's pages turning by themselves. I approached slowly. The pages stopped on a line that read, "Now you understand." My heart thumped. I said aloud, "I don't understand. Please stop moving my books." The pages flipped again. Another sentence. "You must follow." "Follow what?" I asked. "Follow what?" No answer. The room fell silent. I backed away, breathing hard. Over the next few days, the notes and messages grew more insistent. One note said, "Throw the green paperback away." I grabbed the green paperback from the shelf and looked through it. Nothing unusual. I resisted at first, but that night I found the green paperback lying in the bathtub, soaked and ruined. That frightened me. I threw it away the next morning. Another note said, "Stack the red books on the windowsill." I had 2 red books. I stacked them as instructed, feeling stupid for obeying. That night, I recorded again. The red books didn't move. Maybe I had satisfied it. But in the morning, a new note said, "Good." I started to suspect these instructions were tests. Maybe this presence wanted to see if I would follow orders. I didn't want to anger it. I had nowhere else to go and felt too scared to provoke it. So I followed each instruction. Place a certain book on the floor. Leave another book open to a certain page. Turn a desk lamp on at midnight. Each time I complied, I found a note saying "good" or "continue." One night, the note instructed, "Read before it's too late." Read what? I checked the books. One was left open to a story about a man who ignored warnings and lost something dear. Another book's note said, "Choose wisely." Choose what? I felt tears in my eyes, frustrated and scared. I shouted, "Tell me what you want." The door rattled slightly. I froze, waiting. A book fell off the shelf and opened to a page with one word underlined, "Obey." I spent the next week obeying every note. The tasks grew stranger. Move the chair to the corner. I did it. Leave a glass of water by the shelf. I did it. Do not look under the couch. I avoided looking. Each morning new notes appeared, praising or instructing further. My life became a series of odd chores. I felt like I was being trained. Then, one morning, I woke to find a note in the hardcover mystery book that started this all. It said, "Read the entire book today." I had avoided reading it before, but now I sat down and flipped through the pages. It was about a person haunted by signs, forced to follow strange clues. In the story, the protagonist eventually found a secret message on the last page that revealed what the haunting presence wanted. My pulse quickened as I reached the last page. I found no secret message, just old printed text. I felt cheated. I told the empty room, "I read it, now what?" No immediate response. I went to work feeling uneasy and tired. When I returned, the apartment felt heavier. On the coffee table lay another note. "Too late." My chest tightened. I asked aloud, "Too late for what?" Suddenly, several books flew off the shelf, landing on the floor with heavy thuds. My ears rang. I stared, jaw clenched, as the pages rustled, forming a small whirlwind of paper. A single note drifted in front of my face, hanging in midair. I grabbed it, hands shaking. It read, "You failed to see." I panicked. "See what?" I shouted. The pages stopped moving. One book slid toward me on the floor. I picked it up, opened it. A page was marked with a pen. "Look behind the dresser." I had never looked behind there. With trembling hands, I moved the dresser away from the wall. There was a small hole in the drywall. Inside, I found a tiny box. I opened it, expecting maybe a clue. Inside was a folded piece of paper with one sentence: "Set me free." Set who free? I turned to the room. "How?" I asked. No answer. I checked the box again. Nothing else. I placed it on the coffee table, unsure what to do. The books remained scattered on the floor. I cleaned up, careful not to upset anything. I put them back on the shelf gently. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wondered what "set me free" meant. Maybe this presence was trapped somehow. Maybe by reading certain passages or following instructions, I could release it. I tried reading all the books thoroughly, searching for clues. I found nothing concrete, just random stories. As I fell into a light doze around 3 a.m., I heard a soft thud. I turned on the light. One book lay open on my bed. Its page showed a simple diagram of a key. Beneath the diagram, a handwritten note said, "Burn the old mystery book," the hardcover one that started it all. The idea scared me. Would burning it make things worse? But maybe that was how to set it free. I waited until the next afternoon. I took the old hardcover book outside, feeling nervous. I set it in a metal bucket and lit a match. The pages caught fire easily. I watched the flames curl the paper, turning it black and ashy. I felt my heart pound, worried something bad would happen. After it burned completely, I returned to my apartment. The place felt lighter somehow. I checked the shelf. All the other books were in place. No new notes. I spoke aloud. "Is that what you wanted?" Silence. I left a glass of water on the table and went out for a walk, trying to calm down. When I came back, the apartment felt normal. I searched every book carefully. No notes. I tested the shelf by taking a photo of the books before bed and comparing in the morning. Nothing moved. Days passed. No more floating books, no more strange instructions. Eventually, I relaxed. It seemed that burning the old book ended whatever was haunting my shelf. I never understood why. Maybe the presence was tied to that specific book. Maybe the book was cursed somehow. I'll never know. All I know is that life returned to normal. My book stayed put. No more notes, no more invisible hands flipping pages. I stopped recording at night. I slept with ease again. Sometimes I think about that presence, wondering what it was. It seemed to communicate through written words, guiding me to free it by destroying that old hardcover. Maybe it was trapped in those pages. In any case, the ordeal taught me not to ignore strange occurrences. If I ever see a book out of place again, I'll pay attention right away. But for now, I live quietly, my shelf neat and unchanged. No more moving books, no more secret messages. I never replaced the burned book. I left a small gap on the shelf where it once stood. It reminds me that some mysteries are better left unsolved. The presence is gone, and I'm free of its demands. That's enough for me. I remember the first time I noticed it. It was late afternoon, maybe around 6. I was in my office building, on the 6th floor. The corridor there is always quiet after most people go home. I was walking toward the elevator, ready to leave for the day. The hallway was empty. The lights were on, that steady white glow. All the doors were locked. My heels clicked on the floor. Then I heard a sound. It was very soft, like a quiet whisper. I slowed down. I looked around. I stood facing a locked door, an unmarked one at the end of the hallway. I heard a small voice. It was behind that door. I pressed my ear against the surface. It felt cold and smooth. I heard a muffled sound, like someone breathing or whispering. It was too low to make out any words. I stepped back. The door had no sign and no name. I tried the handle. It was locked. I didn't know who used that room. I'd never seen anyone go in or out. I shrugged it off and left. I thought maybe I was tired. Maybe it was the air conditioning. I went home and forgot about it for a while. The next day I passed the door again around lunch. I had to go to the restroom at the end of the hall. This time I heard the sound again. It was clearer. It sounded like someone calling a name. I leaned in. I heard my own name. It was my name. Someone was whispering it. They said it softly. They drew it out. It was slow and gentle, but I could not recognize the voice. It didn't sound like any of my co-workers. I tried to ignore it. I asked my colleagues if they knew who had the office behind that door. Everyone shook their heads. They said no one worked in there. Some said it might be a storage closet. Others thought it belonged to maintenance, but no one knew for sure. I checked the directory in the lobby. No mention of that room. I considered asking security, but I felt silly. It was just a voice, and maybe I was imagining it. A few days passed. I started hearing the voice in other places. I took the elevator down in the morning, and as the doors closed, I heard my name whispered in the corner of the elevator car. It was so quiet that I thought it could be the building's ventilation system. But then I heard it again. It said my name in the exact same tone as before. I stood in the corner of the elevator, facing the door, and I felt the hair on my arms stand up. The elevator arrived at the lobby. I stepped out quickly. I looked around, expecting to see someone near me, but no one was there. That evening, I got into my car in the parking lot. It was around dusk, the light dim. I sat in the driver's seat and shut the door. The parking structure was mostly empty. My car's interior was quiet. Before I started the engine, I heard it again, like a faint whisper in my back seat. It said my name, very slowly and softly. I turned around. Nothing. The seat was empty. I checked the back. Nothing. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling my heartbeat in my ears. The voice followed me everywhere. It never spoke loudly. It never said anything else. It would just say my name when I was alone. After a while, I could sense when it was coming. My skin would prickle. My stomach would tighten. My throat would go dry. Then I would hear it. Always the same tone, the same quiet whisper. I tried talking to someone about it. I mentioned it casually to a coworker. She looked at me like I was joking. When I insisted, she shrugged and said I was probably stressed. I stopped telling people. I tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't go away. It got worse at night. If I worked late, I would hear it in the empty corridors. If I stayed after everyone left, I would feel its presence behind that locked door. About a week later, something changed. I left my office around 9 at night. I was one of the last people there. I walked down the hallway. The building was silent. The door at the end was still there, closed and locked. But something was different. There was a thin line of light beneath it, a faint glow leaking out onto the floor. I froze. I had never seen any light coming from that room before. I approached carefully. I stood in front of the door, holding my breath. I placed my hand on the handle. It felt warm. I turned it gently. This time, It opened. The door swung inward with no sound. On the other side, there was not a normal office room. There was a corridor that stretched forward. It looked nothing like the office interior. The walls were darker, the paint peeling in some places. The floor was scuffed. The lighting was weak and yellowish, coming from small bare bulbs on the ceiling. I stepped inside and took a few steps forward, trying to understand what I was looking at. I expected the door to lead to a small storage closet or a hidden office. Instead, it looked like a long hallway that did not belong to this building. It stretched straight ahead, too long to be part of this structure. I turned around. The door was still behind me. I thought about going back and calling security, but then I heard the voice again. It said my name, sounding closer and clearer than ever. It seemed to come from somewhere ahead, deep in that corridor. I took a few more steps inside, holding my breath. The floor felt uneven under my shoes. The air was stale and smelled like dust. I looked over my shoulder. The door behind me was still ajar. I could see the familiar hallway of my office building. I could see the fluorescent lights out there. I started to sweat. My hands shook. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't want to go in, but I felt compelled to find out who was calling my name. I took a few more steps. The corridor continued straight ahead. No doors on the sides, no signs. Just a long, empty space. My footsteps sounded dull. I glanced behind me again, worried that the door might close. As I did that, I saw the door swing shut. It did so slowly, but by the time I ran back, it clicked closed. I grabbed the handle. It wouldn't budge. I pulled and twisted it. Nothing happened. I put my ear against it. I heard silence. I kicked the door a few times. The sound echoed. I was trapped. I turned around and faced the corridor. I listened carefully. I could hear a faint sound. It was my name, spoken softly, but louder than before. It seemed to come from just up ahead. My mouth felt dry. I wiped my forehead and took a deep breath. I decided to try to find another way out. I walked forward, hoping there would be a door at the end, or maybe a turn leading back to some exit. I walked for a long time. The corridor never changed. The walls looked the same. The lights on the ceiling gave off a weak, flickering glow. The floorboards creaked sometimes. I tried to keep track of how far I had gone, but it all looked identical. I turned around after several minutes. The door where I came from was not visible anymore. It was just a long, empty hallway in both directions. I called out. I said, "Who's there?" I said my own name, hoping to provoke a response. The whisper answered by repeating my name again, this time sounding like it was right behind me. I spun around. No one was there, just the corridor. My heart pounded. I felt sweat dripping down my back. I kept walking forward. My legs felt weak. My eyes strained to see anything different, but it was all the same. The whispering continued. Every minute or so I heard it again. Always my name, always soft, like someone breathing into my ear. I tried walking faster. The corridor seemed endless. After I don't know how long, I stopped and leaned against the wall. The wall felt rough and cold. I tried my phone. It had no signal. I tried the flashlight on it. The corridor was too long and the light was too weak. It only showed me more of the same walls and floor. I thought about breaking a light bulb or prying something open. The ceiling looked high. The bulbs were small and covered by a dull metal cage. I had nothing to stand on. There was nowhere to hide. It was just me and that voice. I shouted at it again. I demanded that it show itself. The whisper answered by repeating my name twice, slowly. I heard a slight movement behind me, like a shoe scraping the floor. I spun around again, and again saw nothing. My chest felt tight. My hands trembled. I tried to run. I figured if I ran straight ahead, I would eventually reach the end. I started jogging, trying not to trip on the uneven floor. The corridor never ended. After a few minutes, I was out of breath. I stopped and bent over, panting. The whisper came again. It sounded closer. I could almost feel the breath on my neck. I jerked around, reaching out with my hand. I grabbed nothing but empty air. I walked and walked. My feet hurt. I tried to think of a way out, but I had nothing. There were no tools. There were no signs or numbers on the walls. The whisper never stopped. It came at intervals I couldn't predict. Sometimes it was ahead, sometimes behind. Sometimes it sounded to my left, sometimes to my right. I looked for cracks or doorways. I found none. My throat was dry. I was hungry and thirsty. I was tired. My shoulders ached. My back hurt. The air felt thick and dusty. I could taste dirt when I breathed. I wiped my mouth on my sleeve. I spoke to myself out loud. I told myself to stay calm. I tried to keep track of time, but I had lost it. My watch was still ticking, but that didn't help. I had no idea how long I'd been there. Maybe an hour, maybe more. After a while, I heard the voice much closer. It sounded like it was right at my ear. I stopped dead still. I held my breath. I reached out my hand. I felt nothing. I tried stepping sideways, pressing my back against the wall. My heart was racing. My face felt hot. I tried to calm my breathing. The whisper said my name again, softer than a breath. I spoke quietly. "Who are you?" Silence. Then my name again, drawn out, like someone trying to get my attention. I took a step forward. I wanted to run, but I was tired. I took slow steps. Suddenly I heard a creak right behind me, as if someone pressed a foot onto a loose plank. I spun around. Still no one there. I pressed my hand to my chest. I felt my heart pounding. I realized I might never find a way out. The corridor looked the same in every direction. I decided to go back the way I came, or at least what I thought was back. I turned around and started walking. After some time, I found something different. The door I came through was there again, standing closed in the wall, as if I had never left. The same faint light under it. I rushed to it. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It was locked. I hit it with my palm. I tried to kick it. The door didn't move. I stepped back, breathing hard. I pressed my ear against it. I heard nothing outside. I tried calling out for help. My voice sounded weak in this space. There was no reply, only silence, and then the whisper again. Now it came from my left side. I turned my head. Nothing there. Just the corridor stretching into darkness. The lights flickered once. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, the corridor looked a bit different. The paint on the walls looked more chipped. The floor looked more worn. The air smelled stronger, like mold. I tapped the door again, hoping something had changed. Nothing. I leaned my forehead against it, trying to steady my breathing. The whisper said my name again, right behind me. I felt the skin on my neck crawl. I felt a cold sweat on my face. I turned around slowly, raising my arms as if to block something. I saw only the corridor, empty and quiet. I took a step back until I touched the door with my spine. I breathed through my mouth. My legs were shaking. The whisper came again, and this time I swore I felt something brush against my hair. I jerked forward, swiping the air with my hand. I felt nothing. I was alone, but I knew something else was here. I couldn't see it. I could only hear it calling my name. I stood there, back against the door, breathing fast, heart pounding. My body felt cold. I couldn't think. I could only react. I tried to force the door open again. I yanked the handle, twisted it, pulled with all my strength. Nothing moved. I banged my fists on the door. I shouted for help. My voice bounced off the corridor's walls. Then I stopped making noise. I just listened. There was a long silence. I could hear my own breathing. Then the whisper came again, very close, directly in my right ear. I screamed and jumped sideways. I stumbled and almost fell. My eyes darted around. Still no one there. The corridor stretched on, empty and unending. I backed up against the door again, pressing my shoulder blades to the wood. I was trapped. I couldn't get out. The whisper wasn't going away. It was here with me. I stood there, hands shaking, and waited. The whisper kept repeating my name, softer and closer each time. It never stopped. It never spoke any other words. It just kept calling my name, as if waiting for me to answer. I stayed quiet, hoping it would go away, but it didn't. I knew I was stuck here, in this corridor, with that voice that knew my name. I couldn't escape. I couldn't see it. I couldn't stop it. I could only stand there and listen to it whisper, again and again, as the dim light flickered on the peeling walls and the locked door stayed shut behind me. I remember the moment I first saw it. It was late on a Saturday afternoon, just after I came back from the grocery store. I had put away the milk and eggs, and I decided to tidy up my room before settling down on the couch. My jewelry box was on my dresser, right where I always kept it. The lid was closed, just like I had left it. I opened it to take a quick look at my favorite earrings, and that was when I saw the ring. It was a silver ring, plain, no stones, no engraving. I didn't recognize it. I kept neat track of my jewelry. I knew every piece I owned, the old watch from my grandmother, the pair of gold studs from my mother, a silver necklace with a small charm, and a few rings that I wore on special occasions. But this silver ring was something new. It lay right there beside my favorite earrings, as if I had placed it there myself. I picked it up. It felt cool and smooth between my fingers. It looked like it would fit my ring finger. I tried it on. It stopped halfway. It was too tight. I twisted it, tried to push it a bit, then gave up. It didn't fit. I shrugged. I thought maybe a friend left it behind, but I couldn't recall anyone borrowing my jewelry box or placing something in it. I put it back inside and closed the lid. Later that night, something felt off. I went to the kitchen and found my keys, not on the hook by the door, but on top of the fridge. I was sure I left them on the hook. I always put them there. I chalked it up to being distracted. Maybe I put them there absent-mindedly after coming back from the store. I retrieved them and went to the living room. The next day, I woke up early. I got dressed and was heading out when I noticed a mug on the windowsill in the hallway. I never leave mugs there. I always put them in the sink after I finish my coffee. I didn't remember using a mug near the window. I grabbed it and brought it to the kitchen. This small stuff kept happening over the next few days. Objects showed up in places where I had never put them. My hairbrush appeared inside the laundry basket. A pair of scissors I kept in a drawer was now on my pillow. I felt uneasy. I started checking my doors and windows every night to make sure they were locked. They were always locked. I decided to check the jewelry box again. The ring was still there. I picked it up and examined it more closely. It had no marks, no logos. It looked very plain, but I couldn't figure out where it came from. I thought of throwing it away, but I hesitated. It didn't seem valuable, yet it felt strange to just toss it. Instead, I locked it in the jewelry box, which itself had a small lock. I put the key in my desk drawer. That night, I slept poorly. I heard small sounds in the house, like the creak of furniture settling or a soft tap on a wall. I kept telling myself it was normal. Old buildings make noise. In the morning, I went to get my favorite earrings from the jewelry box. When I opened it, the ring was gone. I blinked. I removed all my other pieces, checking the bottom of the box. Nothing. It had disappeared. That was impossible. I had locked it. My earrings and necklaces were all there, but not the ring. I tried to calm down. I checked my desk drawer for the key. The key was still there. I unlocked the box using the same key. So how did the ring get out? Maybe I had misplaced it. Maybe I took it out and forgot. I searched the whole bedroom. I checked under my bed, behind the dresser, in all my drawers. No ring. Later that afternoon, I found the ring on the kitchen table. I was sure I hadn't put it there. I stared at it for a long time. I picked it up. It still didn't fit my finger. I set it back into the jewelry box and locked it again. This time I listened carefully for any sounds, waited for any sign of movement. Nothing happened. When I checked again an hour later, the ring was still there. I felt relieved, but things got worse the following night. I woke up at around 3 in the morning to use the bathroom. As I returned to bed, I noticed something on my bedside table. The ring. It was sitting there, in plain sight. The jewelry box was locked in my dresser. I hadn't touched it. My heart pounded. I felt my mouth go dry. I looked around the room. Everything was quiet. I grabbed the ring and placed it inside a small cardboard box, then put that box inside my closet, behind a stack of sweaters. I closed the closet door and went back to bed. In the morning, I opened the closet. The cardboard box was there, but it was empty. The ring was now on top of my folded jeans on a shelf near the door. My head started to pound. I felt sweat under my arms. I touched the ring again. It was cool and smooth, just like before. I decided I had to get rid of it. I placed it in my purse and walked outside. I tossed it into a trash bin down the street. I watched it drop onto some crumpled papers and a plastic bottle. I shut the lid and walked away, trying not to look back. That night, I double-checked all my doors and windows again. Everything locked. I sat on my couch, watching some random TV show, trying to forget about the ring. I went to bed early. In the morning, I felt calmer. I got dressed and went to the kitchen to make coffee. On the kitchen counter, next to the sugar bowl, lay the ring. My throat tightened. I stepped back, bumped into the fridge. It was back. I had thrown it away, and now it was here. I grabbed it, holding it tightly in my hand. I felt no warmth, no vibration, nothing. It was just a ring. I tried wearing it again, but it didn't fit my finger. It got stuck at the knuckle. I pulled it off, a bit harder this time. I tossed it onto the counter. I needed to think. I tried calling a friend, but I didn't know what to say. Hey, a ring keeps showing up in my house. She would think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. I decided to put the ring in a small metal box I had, the kind used for storing old coins. I locked the metal box with a tiny padlock and hid it in the attic. The attic was dusty and dark. I had to climb a small ladder to get in there. I placed the box behind an old suitcase. I climbed down. My heart was racing. I washed my face with cold water. I told myself that if the ring didn't come back by tomorrow, maybe I had managed to contain it. That evening, I found my remote control in the bathroom sink. My phone charger was under the couch cushions. A spoon I left in the sink ended up on my bedroom floor. I was sure I wasn't doing these things. I started to think maybe someone was entering my apartment without my knowledge. But how? The locks were secure. There was no sign of forced entry. I considered installing a camera, but it was late and I was too tired. I went to bed with a knot in my stomach. At around 4 in the morning, I woke up to a clinking sound. I turned on the bedside lamp. The ring was on my nightstand again. It sat there innocently. I felt tears well up in my eyes. I grabbed it and threw it against the wall. It bounced off and landed on the rug. I got up, snatched it off the floor, went to the window, and opened it. I lived on the 3rd floor. I threw the ring out the window, hearing it hit the pavement below with a faint ping. I closed the window, locked it, and crawled back into bed. My heart wouldn't slow down. I stayed awake until morning. At dawn, I went outside and looked around. I couldn't find the ring on the sidewalk. Maybe someone picked it up. Good. I went back inside, hoping I had finally gotten rid of it. I didn't mention any of this to anyone. I felt ashamed and afraid they'd think I was crazy. For a few hours, things were normal. I made breakfast, did some cleaning, tried to relax. Around midday, I decided to check my jewelry box again. I opened it and nearly dropped it. The ring was inside, sitting in the center, as if it had never left. I slammed the lid shut. My hands shook. I paced around the room. My head felt light. I couldn't understand how this was possible. I touched my finger. It felt sore where I had tried to put the ring before. I rubbed it. My skin felt normal. I looked down at my hands. Nothing there. No ring on my finger. I took a deep breath. I opened the jewelry box again. The ring was gone. Now I was sure I was losing it. I had just seen it seconds ago. I checked the box's contents. Everything else was normal. I closed it again and went to the kitchen. I needed water. As I reached for a glass, I felt a slight pressure around my finger. I looked down. The ring was on my finger. It was there, sitting at the base of my ring finger, fitting perfectly. I gasped. I tried to pull it off. It didn't budge. I yanked it harder. It stayed in place, tight, as if molded to my skin. My heart thumped. I tried soap, oil, anything to lubricate it. Nothing worked. The ring wouldn't move. I stared at it. It had no seam, no feature, just a plain band. But it was stuck. My finger started to throb from pulling on it. I grabbed a pair of scissors, thinking maybe I could pry it off. The metal didn't give. I stopped before I hurt myself. I sat on the floor, breathing heavily, trying to calm down. Over the next hours, I tried every trick I knew to remove a stuck ring. Cold water, ice, string around the finger trick. Nothing worked. It was as if the ring had fused to my skin. I felt trapped. I wondered if I should go to a hospital or a jeweler to cut it off. But I feared what would happen if I tried that. What if it didn't come off at all? I waited until late afternoon. I decided to go to a local jeweler I knew. Maybe he had a tool to cut it. I got in my car. My hands gripped the steering wheel. The ring felt like a band of pressure on my finger. I drove to the jewelry store. It was closed. Sunday hours. I sighed and drove back. At home, I sat in my living room, staring at my hand. I heard a sound in the bedroom. I jumped up and ran there. Everything looked normal. I went to the bathroom. The towels were on the floor. I was sure I had hung them neatly. I picked them up, turned around, and saw the drawer under the sink was now open. I pushed it shut. My head ached. I decided to rest on the couch and watch TV. Maybe if I ignored it, it would go away. After a few hours, nothing strange happened. It got late. I felt exhausted. I went to bed, the ring still on my finger. I couldn't stop touching it. It felt tight, but not painful. I turned off the light and stared into the darkness. At some point in the night, I woke up. I felt a tug on my hand. I turned on the lamp. The ring was still there, but now it felt loose. I slid it off easily. I held it between my thumb and index finger. My heart raced. I got up quietly, tiptoed to the kitchen, and placed it in a plastic container. I put the lid on and sealed it with tape. Then I placed the container in the bottom cupboard behind some old pots. I returned to bed. I listened to the silence. It was calming. I closed my eyes. At dawn, I checked the cupboard. The container was still there, sealed. I opened it. The ring lay inside, motionless. I touched my finger. No mark, no pain. I picked up the container and walked outside to my car. I decided I would drive far away and leave it somewhere. I got in the car and placed the container on the passenger seat. I drove for about an hour, out to a quiet country road. I stopped near a wooded area. I took the container and walked a few steps into the woods. I opened it and dropped the ring onto the ground, covering it with leaves. I walked back to my car and headed home. My chest felt lighter. I tried not to think about it. Back at home, I found everything in its proper place. I made myself tea and sat quietly. A day passed, then another. No sign of the ring. No strange movements of objects. I started to relax. I began sleeping normally again. After a week, I opened my jewelry box to grab my earrings. Everything looked fine, no extra items. I felt relieved. Another week passed. Nothing happened. I gradually stopped worrying. The memory felt like a bad dream. I never told anyone about it. I avoided that country road, but everything else returned to normal. It's been a month now. I still think about it sometimes, how that ring kept appearing, how it ended up on my finger. But it's gone now. I have all my belongings in place. I keep my doors locked. Everything seems stable. I hope it stays that way. I remember when I first noticed the sound. It was late at night, maybe around 2 or 3 in the morning. I had moved into the new house only a week before. The place was quiet, a small suburban home on a sleepy street. I had no neighbors close by. The upstairs floor was mostly unused. I slept downstairs in the master bedroom. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just the old wooden floors settling, or maybe some animal outside. But it came from above, like soft footsteps. I got out of bed and walked upstairs with a flashlight. I wore only a t-shirt and shorts. The wooden steps creaked under my feet. The upstairs hall was empty. I checked the guest rooms. Nothing was there. The windows were locked. I listened carefully, holding my breath. The house was silent now. I went back down and tried to sleep again. The next night, I heard it again. Light, careful footsteps across the upstairs floorboards. This time they seemed to pause right above my bedroom. My heart thumped. I got up, breathing through my nose, trying to stay quiet. I walked upstairs again, moving slowly. I didn't see anything. I turned on the hallway light, checked each room. Still nothing. I stood there for a few minutes, waiting. Silence. After a while, I went back to bed. A few days later in the morning, I found something strange in the entryway. There was a pair of old shoes by the door. They looked worn, with scuffed soles and cracked leather. I didn't own shoes like that. I had never seen them before. I checked all the doors and windows. Locked. No sign of forced entry. I picked up the shoes. They smelled musty. They were heavy, like old-fashioned men's work shoes. I placed them outside on the porch, thinking maybe a stranger dropped them there, but it didn't make sense. That night, I heard the footsteps again. This time I stayed in bed at first, listening carefully. The steps were soft but distinct. They moved from one end of the upstairs hallway to the other, then stopped. I felt a chill on my neck. I got up and quietly climbed the stairs, holding my breath. I saw nothing, but the air upstairs felt colder. I turned on every light. The rooms were empty. I searched behind doors, in closets, even under the bed in the guest room. Nothing. The next morning I found the shoes inside again. This time they were near the bottom of the stairs. I was sure I had left them outside. I felt my stomach knot up. I checked the locks again. Everything secure. I took the shoes out once more. I dropped them in the trash bin outside. I told myself not to worry. That night, I tried to stay awake. I sat on the couch in the living room, lights off, listening. Around the same time, I heard the floorboards upstairs creak. The sound moved slowly. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet. I climbed the stairs, heart pounding. The hallway was dimly lit by a nightlight I had plugged in earlier. I saw nothing unusual, but I felt watched. My arms tensed. My hands gripped the bat tightly. Then I heard a slight shuffle behind me. I spun around, bat raised. The hallway was empty, but I was sure I had heard something. I spent the rest of that night downstairs, dozing on the couch. When I woke up at dawn, I went upstairs again. Everything looked normal. I went downstairs and prepared coffee, trying to stay calm. After breakfast, I went to the entryway. I almost dropped my mug. The shoes were back inside, placed neatly side by side, pointed towards the stairs. I didn't understand how it was possible. I took the shoes, put them in a bag, and drove to a nearby dumpster a few blocks away. I threw them in and watched them land among broken boxes and old junk. I drove home, sweating. I locked my door and tried to go about my day. In the afternoon, I noticed that my footprints were visible on the dusty parts of the hardwood floor. I had been wearing slippers, leaving faint tracks. I imagined someone following me inside the house. I checked every corner. No sign of anyone. Just the lingering sense that I was not alone. That night, I heard the footsteps again. They started in the same place, above my bedroom. Soft steps, almost gentle. I lay in bed, barely breathing, thinking maybe I was hallucinating. The steps moved closer, as if the person upstairs was heading toward the top of the staircase. I got up, bat in hand, and rushed upstairs. Nothing. Empty hallway. I checked the rooms. All normal. I went back down. The second I reached the bottom, I heard a creak right above my head. I jumped. My skin prickled. I ran back up again. Still nothing. This kept happening. I would chase the sound upstairs, but never catch anyone. I started to feel paranoid. I installed a small camera in the upstairs hallway, a cheap webcam connected to my laptop. That night, I stayed downstairs and waited. When I heard the footsteps, I looked at the laptop feed. The hallway looked empty, just dim light, no movement. But I could still hear the steps. They didn't match what I saw on the screen. It was maddening. The next morning, I found footprints in the dust upstairs. They looked like shoe prints, heavy and old-fashioned, much like the shoes I had found before. They led from the far end of the hallway, stopped in front of the guest room door, then vanished. I wiped them away with a cloth, hoping not to see them again. That evening, I walked to the front door to head out for groceries. The shoes were there again, inside the house, facing the stairs. My throat tightened. I felt shaky. I grabbed them and checked the inside. They were cold and smelled damp. I threw them into a plastic bag and placed them in the garage this time, then locked the garage door. The garage had no windows, and the only entry was from inside the house. I made sure that door was locked too. At night, I sat in my armchair, lights off, waiting for the steps. They came at the usual hour, soft and steady. I crept upstairs and saw nothing. I rushed to the garage to check on the shoes. They were gone from the bag. I backed away slowly, breathing through my mouth. I felt lightheaded. I returned to the hallway. The shoes now sat on the floor upstairs, at the end of the corridor, as if someone placed them there to mock me. I couldn't handle it anymore. I screamed, "Who's there?" My voice echoed. The footsteps stopped. I walked slowly toward the shoes, bat in hand. I knelt down and picked them up. They felt heavier than before. I dropped them and turned around. The hallway was empty, but I swore I heard breathing behind me. I swung the bat wildly. It hit the wall, chipping the paint. Nothing else was there. I ran downstairs and locked myself in my bedroom, pushing a dresser in front of the door. My heart pounded. I hardly slept that night. In the morning, I found footprints in every room I had entered the day before. They followed my path exactly, always appearing a step or two behind where I had been. I saw them in the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, even the bathroom. I checked every window and door, all locked. No one could have entered. I had no explanation. My hands shook as I touched the windowsills, looking for clues. Nothing. I decided to call a locksmith to change all the locks. He came in the afternoon, replaced the front door lock, checked the windows. He said everything looked secure. I asked him about the possibility of someone hiding in the attic or the crawl space. He checked quickly and saw no sign of entry. After he left, I still felt uneasy. I ate dinner without appetite. I forced down a sandwich. The house felt tense, like it was waiting for something. I turned on all the lights. I paced around, waiting for the usual time. When the footsteps began, I was ready. I stormed upstairs with the bat and a flashlight, yelling for whoever it was to come out. I checked every corner, opened every closet, looked under the beds. Nothing. But I could still hear the steps. They seemed to circle around me, always out of sight. When I went back downstairs, I found the shoes in the living room. This time, there was a small scrap of paper next to them. I picked it up. It was blank, just an old piece of torn paper. I dropped it. I felt dizzy, angry, scared. I tried throwing the shoes out again, this time driving them far away. I found a large dumpster behind a closed gas station. I tossed the shoes in and sped home. It was late, and I was tired. In the dark, I climbed into bed, trembling. Maybe now it would stop. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Hours passed. Then I heard it again. Light steps on the floor above me. I bit my lip. I was too afraid to go up. I stayed in bed, listening. The steps moved slowly across the room above. Then they stopped right above my bed. I could almost feel someone standing there, separated from me by just a thin layer of wood and plaster. My body went rigid. I barely breathed. Suddenly, I heard a soft creak from the ceiling corner, like someone shifting their weight. My heart hammered. I grabbed the bat from under my bed and stood up. I moved quietly toward the staircase, my knees weak. I crept upstairs one more time. The corridor was empty and silent, but the guest room door was open now. I had closed it before. I stepped inside that room. It was unfurnished, just a bare floor and walls. I stood there, shining the flashlight around. Dust motes in the air, nothing else. I heard a creak behind me. I spun around. Nothing, but something felt off. The temperature dropped. My skin prickled. I backed out of the room and returned downstairs. I tried calling a friend, but it was too late. No one answered. I sat in the kitchen, tapping the bat nervously on the floor. When I finally slept, it was nearly dawn. I woke a few hours later and found footprints again. They matched my path from the night before. Every place I went, they followed a step behind. The shoes were nowhere to be found. I checked the closet where I kept them once. Empty. I checked the front porch. Nothing. I called a home inspector. He arrived that afternoon. I told him I heard noises. He climbed into the attic, checked the insulation, looked behind walls where he could. Nothing. He said the house was solid. I tried not to sound crazy. I thanked him and watched him leave. I stared at the empty street. Everything looked normal outside. I tried a new tactic that night. I decided to sleep upstairs in the guest room to see if the footsteps would come. I laid out a sleeping bag on the floor. I kept the bat next to me. I turned off the light and closed my eyes, listening. For a while, nothing happened. Then, just as I started to drift off, I heard a soft step behind me. I bolted upright, flashlight in hand. Empty room. But I heard it, clear as day. I aimed the flashlight at the door. The hallway looked normal. I looked down at the floor. Footprints appeared slowly, one after another, but I saw no foot creating them. They pressed into the dusty floor, step by step, heading towards me. My throat clenched. I stood up, holding the bat in front of me. The footprints stopped a few feet away, facing me. I yelled for it to leave me alone. My voice cracked. The air felt heavy. I swung the bat at the empty space. I hit nothing but air. The footprints just stood there. Then, slowly, they started to fade, the dust settling back into place. I backed up against the wall, breathing fast. My heart pounded. I waited for something else to happen, but nothing did. Eventually, I picked up my sleeping bag and went downstairs. I stayed awake in the living room, all lights on, until morning. The next day, I found no new footprints. The shoes did not reappear. For a few nights, everything stayed quiet. I began to hope it was over. Then, on the fourth night, I woke up to the sound of a soft tap near the foot of my bed downstairs. I turned on the lamp. The shoes stood there, placed neatly side by side. I cursed under my breath, jumped out of bed, and grabbed them. I carried them outside and set them on the sidewalk. I watched from the window. For an hour, they remained where I left them. Finally, I closed the curtain and tried to rest. In the morning, the shoes were back inside, right by my bed. Footprints led from the door to my bed and back. I screamed in frustration. My head ached. I had no idea what to do. I tried leaving the house for a few hours. When I returned, the shoes were gone, and no footprints appeared. That night, I slept in a hotel. I needed a break. The next day, I returned home. I checked every room carefully. No shoes, no footprints. The floors were clean. I spent a quiet evening reading, trying to relax. That night, I slept in my own bed. Around the usual time, I heard a slight creak upstairs. I tensed, but stayed still. The footsteps moved once across the floor. I listened, teeth clenched. Then they stopped. I waited. Silence. I forced myself to relax. In the morning, I found nothing unusual. Over the next week, the footsteps gradually faded. The shoes never returned. The footprints did not appear again. It was as if whatever had been there finally grew tired of me. I never discovered who it was or why it followed me. Over time, I learned to live with the memory. I still sleep downstairs, and I still listen carefully at night. Sometimes I think I hear a faint step above, but it might just be my imagination. For now, the house is quiet. I hope it stays that way. I remember the first time I smelled it. It was late afternoon, maybe around 5. I had just finished cleaning the living room. I stood by the couch, looking around to see if everything was in order. Then I caught a faint scent in the air. It smelled like fresh flowers, something sweet and delicate. I looked around for a vase or bouquet, but there was nothing. I didn't own any flowers. I opened the window to check if it was coming from outside, but the street was quiet. No gardens, no flower shops nearby. I closed the window and walked through the house, sniffing the air. The smell was strongest in my bedroom. I checked under the bed, inside the closet, behind the furniture. Nothing. I shrugged and tried to ignore it. Maybe it would go away on its own. That night I tried to sleep, but the floral scent was even stronger. It made my nose itch. I covered my face with a pillow, but it didn't help. I got up and checked the windows again. They were closed. No drafts. The air was still, yet the smell lingered. The next morning, I woke up feeling restless. The scent was still there, hanging in the air like a perfume cloud. I opened all the windows, hoping fresh air would push it out. After a while, the smell faded a bit. I got dressed, made coffee, and tried to focus on my day. But as soon as I closed the windows, the smell returned. That evening, as I lay in bed, I felt a slight chill. The room was not cold, but a light breeze touched my face. I checked the windows again. Still locked. The curtains didn't move. Yet I felt a gentle current of air, carrying that floral scent. My mouth went dry. I sat up, rubbing my arms. I looked around the room. Nothing was out of place. I pulled back my pillow and found a dried flower petal underneath. A single wilted petal, small and curled at the edges. I didn't know where it came from. I picked it up and tossed it into the trash. The next day I found more petals. A few on the kitchen counter, one near the bathroom sink. They were small and brownish, like old petals that had fallen off a dying flower. I had no flowers in the house. I checked every cabinet and drawer, looking for a hidden bouquet or a forgotten potpourri sachet. Nothing. The smell grew stronger in the bedroom. I searched every corner again, feeling the walls, lifting the mattress, opening all the drawers. I found no source. I started feeling uneasy. My stomach tightened whenever I entered the bedroom. I slept poorly. At night, I woke up coughing, my nose filled with that floral scent. It was too intense. It made me dizzy. I kept the windows open, but the smell remained. Sometimes it vanished for a moment when I stepped out of the house, but as soon as I came back, it greeted me again, even stronger. I decided to leave the house for a day. I packed a small bag and stayed with a friend that night. At my friend's place, I felt normal again. No strange smells, no petals. But in the morning, as I got dressed, I smelled that same floral scent clinging to my clothes. I checked my bag and found a single dried petal at the bottom. My friend's apartment was small and clean, no plants or flowers. Yet here was that petal. My friend asked if something was wrong. I lied and said no. I didn't want to sound crazy. I went back home in the afternoon. The moment I opened the door, the scent hit me hard. It was like stepping into a greenhouse. I coughed and rubbed my nose. My eyes watered. I ran to the kitchen to open a window. I looked around and saw petals scattered on the floor, some near the living room rug, some by the front door, a few leading down the hallway. I picked them up with trembling hands and tossed them in the trash. I tried wiping the floors, hoping the smell would fade. It didn't. It stayed thick in the air. Over the next days, the situation got worse. The smell followed me around the house. It was strongest in the bedroom, but it spread to every room. I found petals inside the fridge, behind the TV, under the doormat. I constantly cleaned, vacuumed, wiped surfaces, but new petals appeared. I couldn't understand how they got there. I searched every inch of the house for any hidden source. Nothing. I tried using air fresheners, incense, scented candles. They just mixed with the floral smell, making it heavier and more nauseating. I opened all the windows, but it stayed inside. I felt trapped. I started having headaches and felt anxious every time I breathed in that scent. One afternoon, I decided to leave again. I needed a break. I grabbed my purse and walked down the street. As I got farther from the house, I expected the smell to disappear, but it stayed with me. I sniffed my clothes, my hair, my skin. I smelled like that strange floral perfume. I walked faster, trying to outrun it. The air outside was fresh, but I could still catch whiffs of the scent around me. It was faint, but persistent. I stopped at a cafe and sat outside. I ordered a coffee and tried to calm down, but even out here, I smelled it. I looked around at the other tables, the people passing by, the sidewalk. No flowers nearby, no gardens, yet the smell lingered. I touched my face and hair, trying to identify a source. Nothing obvious. I went back home, feeling defeated. Inside, the smell was intense again. I coughed and opened a window. Petals were scattered on my bed now. I picked one up. It was dry and brittle. I crushed it between my fingers, feeling the flakes crumble. I checked under the bed and found several more. They formed a small pile near the corner. I swept them up, flushed them down the toilet. I hoped they would stay gone. That night, I woke up gasping. The smell was overpowering. I felt pressure in my chest. I rushed to the living room, opened a window, and stuck my head out, breathing the night air. The scent clung to me like a layer on my skin. I tried changing clothes, showering, scrubbing my body, washing my hair. When I stepped out of the shower, the bathroom air smelled like flowers. I checked the vents, the drain, the corners. Nothing. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a towel, dripping water. I listened to the silence of the house. My heart pounded. My hands shook. I felt trapped. I tried calling someone, but it was too late. No one answered. I paced the living room, sniffing the air like a cornered animal. The smell didn't fade. The next morning, I decided to get professional help. I called a local inspector, someone who could check for mold or hidden pests. He arrived and walked through the house. He sniffed the air and said he noticed a strong fragrance, but he had no idea what caused it. He checked the walls, the attic, the basement. He found no flowers, no dead animals, nothing that could explain it. He seemed puzzled. He left, shrugging, charging me a fee for the visit. I started avoiding the bedroom. I slept on the couch with the windows open. I tried to eat outside, keep the doors open, anything to reduce the intensity. The petals still appeared, no matter what I did. They showed up in my shoes, in my jacket pockets, inside closed drawers. Every time I touched one, I felt a slight discomfort in my chest, like the smell was getting inside me. I decided to leave town for a few days. I thought maybe if I left for long enough, the smell would dissipate. I booked a hotel in a nearby city and drove there. Inside the car, I could still smell it. At the hotel, I opened my suitcase and found petals inside my folded clothes. I flushed them in the toilet, angry and desperate, but the room started smelling faintly floral after a while. I realized I couldn't escape it. It was on me, maybe even in me. After 2 days at the hotel, I returned home. It made no difference. The smell was as strong as ever. The petals welcomed me on the kitchen floor. I kicked them aside, feeling tears in my eyes. I felt like something was invading my space, my body, my mind. I slammed the door and yelled for it to stop. I heard no answer, just my own voice echoing. At night, I barely slept. I lay on the couch, breathing shallowly. The smell felt thicker than air, almost suffocating. I opened a window and stuck my head outside. The night air was fresh, but the floral scent still hung around my face. I touched my nose, wondering if it was coming from inside me. I sniffed my own wrist. I smelled the flowers there. I tried holding my breath for a few seconds, but when I inhaled again, it was still there. I got up and walked around the house, opening doors and windows, turning on fans. The smell never left. I found petals in the sink, on top of the TV, Even in my coat pocket, I felt my pulse racing. The next morning, I decided to get rid of everything in the house that could hold scent. I threw out old clothes, rugs, pillows, blankets. I scrubbed the floors with detergent, wiped every surface with bleach. The house reeked of cleaning chemicals, but underneath that, the flowers persisted. I opened all the windows and doors, letting the breeze pass through. After a while, the chemical smell faded, but the floral scent remained, pure and strong. I thought about leaving the house permanently, maybe sell it, move somewhere else, but I knew it wouldn't help. The smell had followed me to the hotel, down the street, everywhere I went. I realized I could not run from it. That afternoon, I sat in a corner of the living room, knees pulled up, trying to think. I listened to my breathing. I felt the cool air of the open window. The floral scent filled my lungs. I coughed, felt my throat tighten. I got up and walked outside, standing on the sidewalk, looking at the empty street. The air outside smelled of distant traffic, dry leaves, and a hint of that floral scent. It was weaker, but still there. I tried walking in the opposite direction of my house, going blocks away. No matter how far I went, I caught hints of it. Sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker, but never gone. After an hour of walking, I returned home, defeated and exhausted. That night, I felt my chest ache. My head pounded. I hadn't slept properly in days. I lay down on the bare mattress in the bedroom. I had removed all bedding. The smell was strongest here. I stared at the ceiling, breathing shallowly. My eyes watered from the intensity of the scent. After a while, I closed my eyes. I couldn't escape it, so I just lay there, letting it fill my nose, my mouth, my lungs. I drifted in and out of sleep. Each time I woke, I smelled it. Each time I moved, I found more petals scattered around. I didn't bother picking them up anymore. I just accepted their presence. My throat felt raw. My nose burned. My head ached. By morning, I felt too tired to care. The house remained the same the next day. The floral smell still filled every room. Petals lay scattered on the floors and furniture. Outside, the smell followed me. I realized this was my life now. I could not identify the source. I could not remove it. It had become part of my environment, part of me. I moved through the room slowly, breathing carefully, trying not to choke. Now, I live with it. I keep the windows open, but the smell never fades. Petals appear whenever they want. I gather them sometimes, throw them out, but more return. I've stopped trying to figure it out. There is no explanation. It's just there, a constant presence I can't escape. It's always with me. It no longer matters what I do. It's inside me now. I remember the first time I heard it. It was early morning, maybe around 6, and I was walking along my usual trail. I take that trail almost every day before work. It winds alongside a dense forest, quiet and dark. The sun had just started to rise. The air was cool. I wore my running shoes and a light jacket. I moved at a steady pace, not in a hurry, just enjoying the calm. I was halfway through my usual route when I heard someone call my name. It was faint, almost swallowed by the rustling leaves. I stopped and looked around. The trail was empty. No one else walked that early, at least not usually. I listened for a few seconds. There was just the breeze and a distant chirp of a bird. I shrugged and kept going. The next day, it happened again. I reached the same spot near the forest edge. I paused, breathing slowly. Then I heard it. My name. It sounded weak, as if coming from deep among the trees. I took a few steps off the trail, peering into the woods. The light was dim under the thick canopy. I saw nothing, just mossy trunks and tangled roots. I called out, "Hello?" No answer, only silence. I shook my head and headed home, a bit uneasy. For a few days, I tried to ignore it. I focused on my walk, kept my headphones on, listened to music. But even with the music, I thought I heard my name, faint and persistent. I turned off my headphones and listened again. There it was, softer now. I walked closer to the forest line. I noticed something on the ground. Footprints. They were not mine. They were large and spaced out, leading from the trail into a small clearing inside the forest. I followed them a short distance, maybe a dozen steps in. Then they disappeared, as if whoever made them vanished into thin air. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I looked around quickly, heart pounding. Nothing moved. I didn't see any person or animal. I walked back to the trail and continued home. That night, I tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about those footprints and the voice. The next morning, I decided I wouldn't go near the forest. I stuck to the main path. But as I passed the usual spot, I heard my name again. This time, it sounded slightly closer, a bit clearer. My heart sped up. I tried to ignore it, moved on, finished my walk, and went home. Later that day, at home, I heard something that chilled me. I was in my kitchen, making a snack, when I thought I heard my name called again. It came from somewhere outside, maybe near the backyard. I stepped to the window and looked out. I live alone in a small house on a quiet street. There's a fence, a small garden, and beyond that, more trees. I opened the window and listened. Silence. I told myself I was imagining things. Over the next days, it continued. The voice became a strange presence in my life. Every morning on the trail, I heard it calling faintly. Every day at home, I thought I caught a whisper of it on the wind. I locked my doors, closed my windows, checked around the yard. No one was there. But the voice kept calling my name, always distant, never loud enough to identify who it was. My stomach began to knot with tension. I felt uneasy in my own home. I started walking less, afraid to approach that spot on the trail. Instead, I walked on a different route through the neighborhood streets. But even there, I thought I heard it, very faint, as if carried by the breeze from far away. I felt trapped. I couldn't outrun it. One evening, after a particularly tense day, I decided to confront the situation. I prepared a flashlight and a sturdy walking stick. I told myself I would go to the forest at dusk and look around. Maybe I'd find some clue. I left my house around 7, just as the sun was setting. The forest line was quiet. I stood at the spot where I first heard my name. The air was still. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice sounded weak. There was no reply. I tried again, louder this time. Nothing, just my own breathing and the distant hum of insects. I held the flashlight and stepped off the trail into the forest. My shoes pressed into damp leaves. The beam of light shook slightly as my hand trembled. After a few minutes of searching, I found footprints again, similar to before. They led to a small clearing surrounded by tall ferns. I followed them carefully. They ended abruptly in the center of the clearing. I looked around, shining the light on the ground, on the trunks, on the low branches. Nothing. I knelt down to inspect the footprints more closely. They looked human, just a bit larger than my own feet, but I couldn't make out details. The ground was too soft. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. I jerked around, pointing the flashlight. No one there. My heart thudded in my chest. I stood up and backed away slowly. Then I heard my name again, this time so close it made me gasp. I spun around again, shining the light wildly. Still no one there. I ran back to the trail, nearly tripping over a root. I headed home, breathing hard, sweat running down my face. That night, I locked all my doors and windows and sat on the couch, lights off, listening. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. But then, around midnight, I heard it again, just outside the living room window. "My name," whispered softly. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, but he didn't pick up. I refused to go outside. I hid in my bedroom with the door locked, barely sleeping. In the morning, I decided to try ignoring it completely. I wouldn't acknowledge the voice. I wouldn't go near the forest. I would live my life normally. But it didn't help. Now I heard it at random times. In the shower, I thought I heard it through the running water. While watching TV, I muted the volume, and there it was, faint but persistent. My nerves were on edge. My stomach was always tense. I jumped at every small noise. I checked the backyard again. I found footprints there too, similar to those in the forest. They circled around my garden, leading right up to my back door. The door was locked, but the thought of someone pacing around while I slept made me feel sick. I crouched down and touched one of the footprints. The soil was damp, the print clear. Someone or something had been there. I called the police, reported a prowler. An officer came, looked around, found nothing. He told me to install cameras if I was worried. I bought a motion-activated camera and placed it facing the backyard. That night I heard the voice again. I checked the camera feed in the morning. It showed nothing, just my empty yard, no movement at all. A few more days passed. The voice didn't get louder, but it got more frequent. I felt it pulling at me, urging me to return to the forest. I resisted, but the tension wore me down. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I decided to go back to the forest trail in the early morning, when the sun was bright. Maybe in daylight, I'd see something clearer. I left the house at dawn. The sky was pink and gold. I walked quickly, heart pounding. The forest edge was quiet and still. As I approached the spot, I heard my name again. It sounded like it came from deeper inside the trees. This time I didn't run. I stepped in carefully, following the footprints if I could find them again. Sure enough, I found a fresh set of footprints leading the same way as before, into the clearing. I followed them slowly, scanning the surroundings. When I reached the clearing, the footprints stopped. I stood there, listening. Then I heard my name behind me, just a few feet away. I spun around. There was no one there, just empty forest floor. I felt sweat trickling down my neck. I whispered, "What do you want?" No answer. I backed away, heading out of the forest. As I left the clearing, I noticed new footprints on top of mine, as if something was walking right behind me. I spun around. Nothing there. But the footprints were fresh, overlapping mine, like someone following closely, then stepping exactly where I had been. My breathing became shallow. I started walking faster, almost running, until I burst onto the trail again. At home, I paced the living room, thinking. The voice didn't sound threatening. It just called my name over and over, like it wanted me to come closer, to go deeper. But I couldn't see anything. That was worse somehow, not seeing who it was. That evening, I heard it from the backyard again. I rushed outside with a flashlight. I scanned the yard, the bushes, the fence line. Nothing moved. I whispered, "Who are you?" Silence. Then I heard my name right behind me. I turned around, heart hammering. Still nothing, just the empty yard. I stumbled back into the house and locked the door. After that, I stopped trying to confront it. I spent my days tense, exhausted, barely sleeping. The voice kept calling me. Sometimes it felt like it was right next to my ear. Other times it sounded distant, like it came from the forest. The footprints kept appearing whenever I checked. They were always behind me, never in front. It was like something was always just a step behind me, watching, waiting. My appetite vanished. I jumped at small noises. I avoided the trail completely now, but that didn't stop the voice. It was with me everywhere, indoors and out. I even considered moving away, but I feared the voice would follow me. It had already followed me home from the forest. Why wouldn't it follow me to a new place? One night, after hours of hearing it whisper my name, I ran outside in my pajamas. I sprinted toward the forest. Maybe if I gave in and went deep inside, I could face it and make it stop. The air was cold. I had no flashlight. I stumbled into the woods, feeling branches scratch my arms. The voice called my name repeatedly, guiding me further in. I found the clearing by moonlight. I stood there, panting, looking around frantically. "Come on!" I yelled. "Show yourself!" The trees stood silent. The voice spoke my name again, softly from behind me. I spun around. Still no one. Just the same footprints on the ground. They formed a circle around me now, overlapping mine, closing in. I screamed in frustration and fear, waving my arms, trying to touch something, anything. Nothing there. I backed out of the clearing, stumbling over roots and rocks until I reached the trail. I ran home, slammed the door, locked it, and sat on the floor, shaking. The voice kept calling my name, quieter now, but steady. I realized I could never catch it, never see it. It would always stay just out of sight. I stopped fighting. I started living with it. I moved slower, spoke less. The voice never left, always calling my name. The footprints appeared wherever I went, as if something invisible followed me. I felt its presence constantly, hovering at the edge of my vision. I learned to accept that I could not escape it. This was my life now. The voice followed me, calling my name from the forest and from the shadows around my home, always one step behind, never letting me rest. I remember the first time I saw it. I had just gotten home from work. It was around 7 in the evening. I live alone in a small apartment, nothing fancy, just a living room, a kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. I'm careful about what I leave around. I keep the place tidy. So when I entered the kitchen and saw a single empty coffee cup sitting in the sink, I stopped and stared. I knew I hadn't used any cups that morning. I usually drink my coffee at work. I picked up the cup. It was clean, except for a faint coffee stain at the bottom. It smelled like fresh coffee, maybe brewed an hour or two before. I stood there, holding it, trying to recall if I had left it there by mistake. I was sure I hadn't. I placed the cup in the cupboard and locked the door before going to bed. I figured maybe I was just tired and forgot something. The next day, I came home at the same time. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. Everything looked normal. I went straight to the kitchen. Another cup sat in the sink. This time it still had a few drops of coffee at the bottom, still wet. My heart beat faster. I knew I hadn't made coffee. I had locked the door when I left that morning. The windows were closed. No one else had a key. I checked the door. The lock looked fine. No signs of forced entry. I opened all the cupboards. The cups were where I left them, except one was in the sink. I touched the coffee drops with my finger. It felt fresh, warm even. I rinsed the cup and put it back. That night I hardly slept. I lay in bed, listening for any sounds. The building was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and distant traffic outside. I got up a few times, checking the kitchen. Nothing changed. The next evening, when I returned home, I rushed to the kitchen before taking off my jacket. The sink had a cup again. This time, the cup was full of coffee. Hot coffee. I hovered my hand above the rim. I could feel the heat rising. I looked around the kitchen. No coffee maker was running. I hadn't turned anything on. I opened the front door again and looked into the hallway. Empty. I closed and locked it. I picked up the cup. It smelled strong and rich. I considered tasting it, but that felt risky. Someone was entering my home, making coffee, and leaving the cup for me. I poured it down the drain, rinsed the cup, and put it away. My hands shook. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? There was no sign of break-in, nothing stolen, just a mysterious coffee cup every evening. I decided to change the locks the next day. I called a locksmith and took the morning off work. He changed the front door lock. I also put a small latch on the window, just in case. I left for work feeling more secure. That evening I opened the door slowly, heart pounding. I stepped inside. The kitchen light was off just as I left it. I moved quietly, flipping on the switch. There it was again, a coffee cup in the sink. This time the cup was empty but still warm, as if someone had poured coffee in it and then emptied it before I arrived. My throat went dry. I checked the locks, still intact, the windows locked. I searched every corner of my small apartment, opening closets and cabinets. No one was there. I grabbed my phone and texted a friend about the situation. He laughed, said I must be forgetting. I insisted I wasn't. He said I should set up a camera. Good idea. I bought a cheap motion-activated camera the next morning and hid it in a kitchen cabinet facing the sink. That evening, I walked in and found the usual coffee cup waiting. I ignored it for the moment and went straight to the camera. I took out the memory card, put it into my laptop, and watched the recording. The footage showed me leaving in the morning. Then the kitchen stayed empty for hours. No movement. Suddenly, late afternoon, the camera glitched. The image froze for a second. When it resumed, the coffee cup was already in the sink. No person, no movement captured, just a sudden appearance. I watched it 3 times. Same result. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. This made no sense. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the cup. My stomach tightened. I got up and checked the apartment door again. Locked. Windows locked. I even checked the vent above the stove. Sealed. There was no way someone snuck in and out without being seen or leaving any trace. The next night I tried staying awake and waiting. I didn't go to work that day. I called in sick and stayed home, sitting in the living room with a clear view of the kitchen. Afternoon came and I watched carefully. Nothing happened. Around 6 in the evening I blinked and suddenly the coffee cup was in the sink. I hadn't looked away for more than a second. My eyes stung from staring so hard. I saw no one enter. The cup just appeared. I approached it. This time the cup was half full of lukewarm coffee. I lifted it and smelled it. It smelled good, like a quality roast. My stomach churned. I poured it out. I turned every light on in the apartment. I paced the rooms, thinking, was I losing my mind? The camera showed nothing. My eyes saw nothing. Yet the cup kept appearing. Over the next few days it continued. Every evening around the same time, a coffee cup appeared in my sink. Sometimes full, sometimes empty, sometimes partially filled. I tried throwing away all my coffee cups. I gathered them all and tossed them in the trash. I waited. That evening, I came home and found a brand new cup in the sink. It was not one of mine. It had a different shape, a plain white mug. The next day, another new one. They kept appearing, even though I had none left. I tried leaving a note by the sink. I wrote, "Who are you? What do you want?" I placed it there in the morning before I left. When I came back, the note was moved to the side, and a cup of coffee sat where it had been. No reply. I tried speaking aloud. I said, "I don't understand what's happening." No answer. Silence. I started sleeping poorly. I felt jumpy, my nerves on edge. Each night I would stare at the sink, waiting. The cup always appeared when I looked away for a split second. If I blinked or glanced at my phone, it would be there. I tried not blinking, but I couldn't stop myself forever. Eventually I blinked, and it appeared. One night I decided to stay up all night. I turned off all the lights except the kitchen light. I sat in a chair facing the sink with my eyes wide open. Hours passed. My eyes burned. Around midnight I heard a faint scraping sound, like a chair being moved on the floor. I jumped up, turned around, and looked at the living room. Nothing there. When I turned back to the sink, the cup was there, filled to the brim with steaming coffee. I almost screamed. I felt tears in my eyes. I grabbed the cup and threw it at the wall. It shattered, coffee splattering everywhere. I wiped my face and tried to calm down. I cleaned up the mess and went to bed, exhausted and scared. The next day, I woke up and entered the kitchen. A coffee cup was on the counter, empty and clean. Next to it was a small piece of paper. My heart skipped a beat. I picked up the paper. It said, "Would you like to join?" I had no idea what that meant. Join what? Who was leaving these cups? I said aloud, "Join what? Who are you?" No response. I searched the apartment again, every inch. Nothing. I checked the camera footage from the night. Just like before, a glitch, then the cup and the note appeared. I thought about leaving the apartment, maybe staying in a hotel for a while. But what if it followed me? I had no proof it wouldn't. This presence, whatever it was, seemed tied to me. It could appear when I blinked. A chill ran down my spine. The next day, another cup appeared with another note. This one said, "I have plenty of coffee." I wrote a response on a piece of paper. "Who are you? Please stop this." I placed it next to the sink. I watched from the living room. After a few minutes, I looked back. The note was gone, and the cup remained. No answer. The following evening, I found a note that said, "I am alone, like you. Let's share a cup." My stomach twisted. I yelled, "Leave me alone!" My voice echoed in the empty apartment. I slammed the door and ran outside, standing in the hallway. I waited there for a long time, hoping something would change. Eventually, I went back inside. The cup was still there, the note too. Over the next week, the notes kept coming. They asked simple questions. How was your day? Would you like cream or sugar? Shall we talk? I stopped responding. I just tore them up and threw them away. But the cups kept appearing every single day. I tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. The smell of fresh coffee greeted me every evening. Sometimes I found multiple cups lined up along the counter, as if someone was trying different blends. Sometimes a note would say, "This one is dark roast," or "This one is from Brazil." Always a calm, friendly tone, but never showing itself. I decided to get rid of everything in the apartment related to coffee. I had no coffee maker, but I checked drawers for filters or anything remotely related. Nothing. Still, the cups arrived. I stopped drinking coffee altogether, but it didn't matter. The presence didn't care. One night, I tried a different approach. I took one of the cups and sat at the table. I said, "I'm here. I'm listening." I waited, sipping the coffee. It tasted excellent, rich and smooth. I felt a warm sensation in my chest. I listened carefully, hoping for a voice or a sound. There was nothing, just silence. After a while, I stood up. The note that night read, "I'm glad you enjoyed it." So it knew. It could see me somehow. I asked out loud, "What do you want from me?" No response. I wrote a note. "I tried the coffee. It's good. Why are you doing this?" I left it by the sink. The next morning, The note was gone. In its place, a single word. Company. Company. That's all it wanted? I said aloud, I'm here. I'm a person. Show yourself. Nothing. I felt foolish, talking to empty air. But maybe this thing, whatever it was, couldn't show itself. Maybe it could only place coffee cups and notes. I tried leaving my own note, longer this time. I wrote, I don't understand who you are or how you do this, but if you want company, why not appear? Why coffee? That evening, I got a reply. I cannot appear. Coffee is comfort. We can share comfort. Please accept. I paced the kitchen, running a hand through my hair. This was crazy, but what choice did I have? The situation wasn't going away. I decided to play along. The next day I found 2 cups in the sink, one with cream, one black. A note said, which do you prefer? I drank the black one. It was delicious. I said aloud, I prefer black coffee. A few minutes later, a new note appeared. Good choice. I started coming home expecting to find a cup. Each day, I drank the coffee and said a few words. I talked about my day. Work was boring today, or I had a long meeting. I never got a verbal answer, but I always found a note later. Meetings can be tough, or boring days happen. I realized I was talking to something I couldn't see, but it listened. It responded in its own way. After a week of this, I felt less afraid. Still confused, but calmer. The cups kept appearing, always warm and fresh. The notes were short, polite, friendly. I told it about my life, simple things. It never asked for anything else. One evening I asked, will you ever show yourself? I left a note on the table. The response came later that night. I cannot, but I am here. That was the last time I asked. I accepted that this was how it would be. The fear subsided. The situation was strange but not harmful. I had coffee waiting for me each day. I had short notes that acknowledged my words. Over time, I felt less alone. I still locked my doors, still had no proof anyone entered. The camera still showed no one. The cups appeared anyway. Weeks passed. I started to enjoy the routine. I would come home, find my coffee, read a note, and leave one in return. Today was stressful, but I'm glad to be back, I'd say out loud. Later, I'd find a note. I'm glad you're back too. I never understood what it was or how it worked, but I learned to live with it. The invisible visitor never harmed me. It never demanded more than my presence. Over time, I stopped questioning it. I shared silent evenings with this unseen companion, sipping coffee and exchanging simple words through notes. Now, each day, I open my door and smell fresh coffee. I know a cup will be waiting. I know a note might say something kind or understanding. I still don't know if it's a ghost, a trick of reality, or something else entirely. But I no longer feel the need to fight it. The coffee is good, and the company, though strange, is better than the silence I had before. I noticed it on a Wednesday afternoon. I had been living in this apartment for about a year. It was a small place on the 3rd floor of an old building. The layout was simple: a living room connected to a kitchen, a small bedroom, and a bathroom. Everything was familiar to me. I knew every corner. That's why the extra door stood out immediately. I came home from work, tired, hungry. I unlocked the door, stepped into my living room, and saw this new door on the opposite wall. It wasn't there before. My heart skipped a beat. The door was closed and plain, painted white, with a simple handle. I approached it and touched it. Solid wood. I pulled the handle, but it didn't budge, locked. I stood back, breathing heavily. I knew my apartment by heart. This door had never existed before. I checked the rest of the living room, running my hand over the walls, trying to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. Everything else was normal. Couch, TV, coffee table. The original doors to the bedroom and bathroom were where they should be. Only this new door was out of place. I decided to ignore it for now. Maybe I was exhausted. I ate a quick dinner and watched some TV, but I kept glancing at the door. It stayed closed, silent. At bedtime, I approached it again and tried the handle more forcefully. No luck. I gave it a light kick. Solid. I leaned in and listened. No sound. I went to bed feeling uneasy. In the morning, I got up and went straight to that spot. The door was gone. Now there was just a blank wall, as it had always been. I touched the wall, knocked on it. Solid plaster. No hinges, no handle, no sign of a door. I stood there, confused and dizzy. I knew I had seen it. I remembered pulling the handle, feeling the wood. But now it was gone. I went to work and tried to forget about it. Maybe I had imagined it. But that evening, when I came home, there it was again. The same door, same size, same position. I felt a chill. I tried to open it again, but it was locked as before. I checked around the apartment, expecting more changes. Everything else was normal. I locked my front door, checked the windows, made sure no one else was inside. Over the next few days, the door continued to appear in the evenings and disappear by morning. Each night, I came home and found it there. Each morning, it was gone. It started to drive me crazy. I set up my phone to record the wall overnight. In the morning, I reviewed the footage. It showed the door slowly fading away before sunrise, like it was never there. The video glitched slightly, as if the camera struggled to capture the change. No person appeared, no sound. I tried calling a friend about it, but what would I say? A door appears in my wall at night and vanishes by morning. He would think I was joking or losing my mind. I didn't want that. I kept it to myself. One evening, I decided to spend the entire night awake, staring at the door. I sat on the couch, a baseball bat at my side, and watched it closely. Around midnight, I got up and approached it. I ran my fingers over the wood. It felt cool. I heard a faint scratching sound from inside. I pressed my ear to the door. There was a muffled noise, like something sliding against a rough surface. I jerked back, heart pounding. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. I pulled the handle repeatedly, but it wouldn't open. I knocked on the door. The knocking echoed strangely, as if the space behind the door was large and empty. My apartment was small. There should be nothing behind that door except the building's wall or maybe another apartment. But it sounded like a hollow space. At around 3 a.m, I must have dozed off on the couch. When I woke up at sunrise, the door was gone again, just a bare wall. I stood there, frustrated and scared. I decided to try something else. The next evening, when the door appeared, I placed a piece of tape along the edge, half on the door frame, half on the wall. I wanted to see what happened when it vanished. In the morning, the tape was still on the wall, intact, as if never attached to any door. Just a straight piece of tape on the plaster. No sign of the door. Another night, I tried pushing a thin knife into the gap between the door and the frame, hoping to unlock it, or at least see something. The knife went in about half an inch, then stopped. I pushed harder, and the knife suddenly slipped through as if the space behind the frame opened up. I tried pulling it back, and for a second I felt resistance, like something held it from the other side. I tugged harder, and it came loose. The tip of the knife was scratched and bent. My hands shook. I backed away and turned on every light. I walked around the apartment talking to myself, trying to stay calm. I yelled at the door, "Who's there? What do you want?" No response. The door remained silent and locked. A few days later, the door started appearing in different places. One evening it showed up in the kitchen, replacing the fridge door. The fridge was still there when I opened it, but now there was also this strange door on the adjacent wall. Another night, I found it inside my bedroom closet. The closet was small, but now had this extra door at the back. I tried opening the closet door in the morning, but it was back to normal, no extra door. Every night the door would appear in a new spot. Sometimes it led nowhere I could understand, always locked, always solid. Once it even appeared inside my bathroom's shower stall, which made no sense. I grew more and more anxious. I stopped sleeping well. I paced the apartment at night, shining a flashlight around, looking for the door's new location. One night, I found the door in the kitchen again. This time there was a faint light under it, a thin line of light leaking from underneath. I dropped to my knees and peered under the gap. I saw what looked like a dusty floor stretching forward, lit by a weak yellowish glow. I couldn't see far, but it looked like a long, empty room. I tried pushing the door, slamming my shoulder into it. It wouldn't budge. I took a hammer and tried hitting the handle, hoping to break the lock. The handle rattled but didn't break. I hammered at the door itself. It made a dull thud, no effect. After several minutes, I gave up, sweating, heart racing. The next morning, no door, just normal walls. By now, I felt scared to come home at night, but I had nowhere else to go. Each evening, I'd find the door somewhere in the apartment. Sometimes the light under it was there, sometimes not. Sometimes I heard faint sounds, a shuffle, a whisper, a distant tapping. My skin would crawl, my mouth go dry. I'd speak, yell, beg, no answer. One particular night, I smelled something. I stepped into my apartment and caught a whiff of dusty air, like an old attic. The door appeared in the living room again, near the couch. I sniffed the air around it, strong, dusty smell. I placed my ear against the wood. I heard a slow, irregular scraping sound, like someone dragging a chair on a rough floor. I backed away, too terrified to try opening it again. I decided to stay at a motel for a couple of nights, hoping the door would stop appearing if I wasn't there. After 2 nights away, I returned home. I opened the front door slowly, holding my breath. The living room wall was bare. No door. I sighed with relief. Maybe it was over. That relief vanished that same evening. I stepped out for groceries and came back after sunset. As soon as I entered, I saw it again. This time it was on the ceiling of the hallway, a door upside down above my head. I climbed on a chair, reached up, touched the handle. Locked. I felt a vibration in the ceiling, like faint footsteps above. Impossible. I lived on the top floor. In the morning, no trace again. I started to worry that each appearance of the door changed something about my apartment. I noticed small details. The paint on the walls looked slightly different after a few nights. A lamp I was sure I placed on the left side of the couch now stood on the right. My toaster disappeared one day, replaced by a similar but older model. Tiny changes, but noticeable. It was as if every time I went through a night with the door, I returned to a slightly altered version of my apartment. I grew paranoid. I took photos of every corner of my place, comparing them each day. Sure enough, small differences appeared after nights the door showed up. A scratch on the floor that wasn't there before. A drawer handle changed shape. My bedding pattern slightly off. I realized I was dealing with something I couldn't understand. The door wasn't just a door. It led somewhere else, and each visit brought subtle changes to my reality. I felt trapped. I didn't know how to stop it. One night, I decided to try something drastic. I waited for the door to appear. This time it showed up behind the bedroom door, as if my bedroom door opened into another door. I took a screwdriver and tried removing the hinges. The screws wouldn't turn. I tried prying the door frame with a crowbar. No luck. The door refused to yield. I started kicking it, yelling. I screamed, "Stop it! Leave me alone!" My voice cracked. I kept kicking until I was exhausted. The door remained solid, no damage. I sat on the floor, crying, confused and alone. Eventually, I fell asleep right there. I woke up in daylight. The door was gone. The bedroom door led to the normal bedroom. Everything looked normal, except my dresser was a different color now. I sighed, defeated. Over the next week, I tried ignoring it. When the door appeared, I just pretended it wasn't there. I avoided looking at it, but it was impossible not to notice. Sometimes it blocked entry to my kitchen. Sometimes it replaced my bathroom door, forcing me to hold my bladder until morning. I started eating out, avoiding being home at night, hoping I could minimize the door's impact. But whenever I returned after dark, it was there. I tried sleeping at a friend's place, no door at his house. But when I came back to my apartment, it kept appearing. Finally, one night, I found the door again in the living room wall. The thin line of light was under it, brighter than before. I crouched down and saw a long hallway, stretching forward, lined with old wooden walls. I realized it wasn't just a random space. It looked like another place entirely, as if my apartment had connected to some endless corridor. Without thinking too much, I grabbed the handle and pulled with all my strength, leaning my shoulder into the door. For the first time, it gave a little. I pulled again and heard a soft click. The door opened a crack. Dusty air rushed out, making me cough. I peered inside. The hallway stretched into dim light. No furniture, no decorations. Just a long, empty corridor that seemed to go on forever. I hesitated, then pushed the door open wider. I wanted to see if I could find something, some clue. I stepped inside, leaving my apartment behind. My heart hammered. The air smelled old and stale. I turned around to see my apartment door behind me, but the door slammed shut, and when I tried the handle, it was locked. I banged on it, yelling, "Open up!" No answer. I looked back down the corridor. It went on, no end in sight. I walked forward, calling out, hearing my voice echo. As I walked, I noticed small changes in the corridor's floorboards, as if they were shifting. The lights flickered. After what felt like an hour, I turned around to go back. But the door to my apartment was nowhere to be found. Just endless corridor in both directions. I started running, panic rising. I ran until I was out of breath, but still no door, no exit. I sank to my knees, trembling. I realized I was trapped. I had stepped through the door, and now I couldn't return. I yelled until my throat hurt. No response. That's where I remain, I think. The corridor never ends. Sometimes I hear faint noises behind me. Sometimes I think I see a door way off in the distance, but when I reach it, it's gone. The floor and walls keep changing slightly, small details shifting like my apartment did. I've lost track of time. I know now I made a mistake. I should never have tried to open that door. My apartment was strange, but at least it was home. Now I'm stuck here, in this endless place, locked out of my own life. I hope someday the door will appear again and let me out. But I have no reason to believe it will. All I can do is keep walking, listening to my own footsteps, and pray that I'll find another door that leads back home. Until then, I'm trapped, alone, with no answers. The door took me somewhere I can't understand, and I may never return. I remember the first time I noticed it. I was working late in a small office building downtown. Our office was a cramped place with a few desks, some old computers, and one separate room that we used for storage. The building was quiet at night. Most people left around 6, leaving only a handful of us finishing reports or catching up on tasks. I liked staying late sometimes because it was peaceful. That night, I was alone. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I decided to take a break from my spreadsheet and stretch my legs. I walked down the hallway toward the empty offices and the storage room at the end. As I passed by the closed door of that small back room, I heard a faint sound. It was a clicking noise, rhythmic and soft, like fingers tapping old keys. I stopped. No one should be in that room. It was just used to store old equipment and furniture. We had an old typewriter there, a relic someone kept for decoration. Could it be that typewriter making noise? That didn't make sense. It was manual. It needed someone pressing the keys. I pressed my ear to the door. The clicking continued at a steady pace. I felt a chill. The door was locked, so I went back to my desk, pretending it was just my imagination. The next morning I mentioned it to a coworker. He shrugged. He said maybe I heard the pipes or something. I let it go. That evening I stayed late again. Around 9, I got curious and went back to the storage room. This time, I brought the key I had borrowed from the supply closet. I unlocked the door slowly and pushed it open, flipping on the light switch. The room was small and dusty. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with old files, broken printers, and tangled cords. In the corner, on a simple wooden table, sat the old typewriter. I approached it quietly. The keys were still. The paper roller was empty. The machine looked untouched. I stood there for a few minutes, listening. Nothing, just silence and my own breathing. I left the room and locked it again. I felt stupid. Maybe it was just the building settling. I returned to my desk and tried to focus on work. After about an hour, I needed to go to the bathroom. On my way back, I passed by the storage room door again. This time, the sound was louder, clear and unmistakable. The typewriter keys were clicking, as if someone was typing a letter inside. My scalp prickled. I pulled the key from my pocket, unlocked the door, and swung it open fast. The room was empty. The typewriter sat there, silent. No keys moving, no paper loaded, just a still machine. My heart pounded. I closed the door and locked it. Then I went home early that night, feeling uneasy. Over the next few days, I heard the noise repeatedly. Each time it came from that storage room, and each time I entered quickly, I found nothing unusual. I started leaving the door unlocked to see if I could catch the typewriter in action. But whenever I looked, it was still. One morning, I found a sheet of paper in the office kitchen. It sat on the counter, folded in half. I opened it and saw typed words, uneven and shaky, as if from that old typewriter. The text made no sense at first. It mentioned events I recognized, office meetings, a coworker's birthday, a recent client call. But then it shifted, describing personal details about me, what I wore the previous day, what I ate at lunch, things only someone observing me closely could know. My chest tightened. Who typed this? I asked around, but no one admitted leaving such a note. Most people just shrugged. Someone said maybe I was the target of a prank, but who would do that? And how would they use that old typewriter without me noticing? That evening, determined to figure this out, I stayed even later, past midnight. The building was nearly silent except for the hum of the lights and the distant elevator machinery. I turned off my computer and snuck down the hall. The storage room door was ajar. I had left it slightly open on purpose. I peered inside, keeping the lights off to remain hidden. The typewriter started clicking. I could see it now, the keys pressing down on their own, one after another. There was no one at the table. The keys moved as if guided by invisible fingers. My heart pounded. I stepped closer, careful not to make noise. The machine typed slowly, line by line, filling the page with words. I leaned in, close enough to see the letters appear. They were about me again, detailing how I stood in the doorway, my face tense, my hands shaking. It described my every move as I made it. My breathing turned shallow. The typewriter was recording my actions in real time. I reached out and touched the side of the typewriter. It was cold metal. The keys continued to move, describing me touching it, noting my trembling hand. I yanked the paper out mid-sentence. The keys stopped. I flicked on the light. The room was empty, just me and the machine. I examined the typewriter from all angles. No wires, no hidden devices. It was old and dusty. I shook it a bit. Nothing unusual fell out. I tried typing something myself. It worked normally, my keys leaving inked impressions on the paper. Then I pulled my hands away, stepped back, and waited. After a few minutes, the keys started moving by themselves again, typing words on a new sheet of paper I had left inside. I snatched it out again, and the typing stopped. I spent hours trying to catch a clue. Nothing. Finally, exhausted and terrified, I locked the storage room and left. The next day, I found more typed pages scattered in odd places. One on my desk, one in the hallway, one in the break room. Each page described events that happened moments before I found it. It was like a running commentary on my life. I tried ignoring it, pretending I didn't see them, but they kept appearing, documenting my every move, every conversation, every small action. I started feeling paranoid. Was I losing my mind? I considered quitting my job, but I needed the income. Instead, I tried to destroy the typewriter. One evening, I brought a small toolbox and removed it from the storage room. I carried it to a maintenance area and tried unscrewing parts, removing the ribbon, hammering at the keys. As I did this, I noticed a piece of paper poking out of the roller. It was typing while I worked, describing how I tried to dismantle it. My anger grew. I tore the paper away, and it typed on empty air, keys hitting with no paper. I smashed it with a hammer. The metal dented, and a key got stuck. I pulled the hammer back, panting. The typewriter fell silent. I left it there overnight, feeling a small sense of victory. In the morning, I returned to the office. I went straight to the maintenance area. The typewriter was gone. I ran around asking if anyone moved it. The janitor said he saw no typewriter. My boss shrugged. I searched every room, every closet. No sign of it. That afternoon, I opened my top desk drawer and found it inside, fully intact. No damage. A piece of paper sat half-typed in its roller, describing how I had tried to destroy it and how I was now looking at it with shock. I slammed the drawer shut and locked it. This was impossible. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? A haunted typewriter was following me around and writing down my life. I'd be laughed at. Instead, I tried bargaining with it. That night, alone in the office again, I opened the desk drawer. It started typing immediately, describing my fearful expression. I spoke aloud, "What do you want?" The typing paused for a moment. Then it slowly spelled out a single word. "Observe." I swallowed hard. "You're observing me?" I asked. The keys clicked. "Yes." I asked, "Why?" It typed slowly. "To record." I asked who or what it was, but it just repeated, "Observe, record." I felt sweat on my forehead. I tried asking more questions, but it only typed the same few words, or described my frustrated attempts to communicate. Over the next days, the typewriter's behavior grew bolder. I'd leave it locked in a drawer, and minutes later, I'd find it on a different desk, typing about me. I'd toss it in a closet, lock the door, and find a typed page on my chair describing how I locked it away. It was everywhere, documenting every second I spent in the office. Co-workers started noticing pages too. They found mysterious typed notes about their lunches, their phone calls, their office gossip. They asked me if I knew anything. I lied and said I didn't. I started avoiding people. I feared the typewriter would reveal my involvement or make me look insane. One evening, after everyone left, I confronted it again. I placed it on my desk and said, "You can observe and record, but you're ruining my life. Stop leaving pages around." It typed, "Cannot stop." I demanded it leave me alone. It typed, "Cannot, must record." I asked, "Record for who?" It typed nothing, just paused. I felt rage and fear mixing inside me. I grabbed the typewriter and ran to the fire escape. I climbed down to the alley. I threw it into a dumpster, buried it under old boxes and trash. I rushed back to the office. 10 minutes later, I heard a soft tapping behind me. I turned slowly, and there it was, on the table near the window. It typed about how I had tried to discard it, detailing the smell of the alley and the look of despair on my face. I screamed, picked up a heavy stapler, and threw it at the typewriter. The stapler hit the wall, missing the machine. The typewriter clicked on, describing my failed attempt. I had to accept it. It was always going to be there, always recording, always describing every moment I spent in that building. The only solution was to leave the job. I packed my personal items and decided to quit the next day. Before leaving that night, I confronted it one last time. "I'm leaving," I said. "You won't have anything to record." It typed, "You will return." I shook my head. "No," I said, "I won't." It typed slowly, "Others come, others go, always someone to observe." I realized it didn't depend on me. It could fixate on anyone. I felt a surge of pity for whoever would be next. But I couldn't stay. I walked out of the office, down the elevator, and into the night. My heart pounded, and I felt relieved to get away from that building. The next morning I called my boss and resigned. I made up some excuse about personal reasons. He sounded surprised but didn't question me. I went to pick up my final paycheck a few days later, careful to arrive during a busy morning when many people were around. I found the office buzzing with chatter. A coworker showed me a strange typed page found in the printer tray, describing their meeting that just ended. She looked confused and worried. I pretended to know nothing. I glanced around. The typewriter was nowhere in sight, but I knew it was there, hiding in a drawer, a closet, or a corner, waiting to record more lives. I grabbed my check and left, ignoring the uneasy feeling in my chest. Outside, the city felt bright and normal. I inhaled fresh air and headed down the street, determined to forget about that cursed machine. Still, sometimes I think I hear faint clicking noises when I'm alone at home. Sometimes I find myself checking closets and drawers, expecting to see it again. So far, it hasn't followed me. I'm free of it, I think. But I know it's still there, in that old office building, typing away, documenting people's days, their secrets, their fears, trapping them in its silent, endless narrative. All I can do is warn anyone who takes that job, steps into that building, or finds themselves alone late at night near that storage room. If they hear clicking keys and find mysterious pages, they should run. Because once it sets its sights on you, it never stops recording. I remember the first time I saw that person. I was on my usual morning bus ride to work. It was a cold day, the windows fogged up. I took my regular seat near the middle. I stared out the window, watching the city pass by. Then I noticed someone standing on the sidewalk, looking directly at me. I couldn't see much detail, just a shape bundled in a coat. The bus moved on, but the figure's face was turned toward me as long as I could see. It felt odd. The next day I took the same bus at the same time. I settled into my seat, thinking about my tasks for the day. When I glanced outside, I saw that person again, standing at a different spot this time, but still watching me. I looked away, then back. They were still there, unmoving. As the bus pulled away, I kept looking until we turned a corner. The figure never approached, never waved, just stared. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was coincidence, but it kept happening. Every morning, no matter where the bus route went, I saw this person. Sometimes they stood near a mailbox, sometimes at a streetlight, sometimes just on an empty sidewalk, always looking right at me. I couldn't see their eyes clearly through the glass, but I felt their gaze. I started feeling uneasy. I changed my seat, moving to the front of the bus. The next day I spotted them outside again, standing further down the road, still watching. I switched sides of the bus. Still there. I took an earlier bus once, trying to avoid them. Didn't work. The figure was there again, at a different location, but still on the route. I took a later bus another time, and there they were, waiting. I couldn't understand how they knew which bus I would be on. I told myself it was just some strange coincidence, or maybe a trick of my mind. But each time I saw them, my chest tightened. I felt my hands grip the seat handle harder. I tried staring at my phone, pretending not to notice, but I always glanced outside, and they were there. One morning, the bus driver announced a problem with the engine. The bus came to a halt at a stop I didn't recognize. The driver told everyone to get off and wait for another bus or find another way. People stood around on the sidewalk, complaining or checking their phones. I stepped off, feeling lost. The area was unfamiliar, a quiet street with old shops, hardly any pedestrians. I looked back at the bus, thinking I might as well walk a bit before finding a taxi. My seat on the bus was visible through the window, and there, sitting where I had been minutes ago, was that person. They sat quietly, facing forward, as if riding the bus I had just left. I froze. How had they gotten on without me noticing? I was one of the last to get off, and I never saw anyone board at that stop. My heart pounded. I felt sweat on my neck. I took a step closer to the bus, but the driver was gone, maybe checking the engine. The figure just sat there. I approached the window and knocked. They turned their head slightly, looked at me. I saw their face for the first time. Pale skin, no expression. Their eyes were flat and calm. They did not blink. I stumbled back, almost tripping off the curb. When I turned around again, the bus driver had returned, talking to someone about a tow truck. The figure was gone. The seat I had occupied was empty. I shook my head, trying to steady my breathing. I decided to leave, walking briskly until I found a main road. The rest of the day I felt tense and distracted. The next day, I avoided that bus route completely. I took a different bus line, one that got me to work a longer way around. I felt relieved at first. The passengers were different. The stops were different. But halfway through, as I stared out at unfamiliar streets, I noticed a reflection in the glass. The person was sitting next to me, right there on the seat beside mine. I turned my head. They were looking forward, not at me, but their presence was undeniable. They wore a simple coat, their hands in their lap. No one else on the bus reacted. I glanced around. Other passengers stared at their phones or out the window, paying no attention. I cleared my throat, trying to speak. Nothing came out. I reached out, intending to tap the person's shoulder to see if they were real. My hand hovered inches away. I could feel the tension in my arm, the knot in my stomach. Finally, I touched the coat's sleeve. It felt solid, like fabric. The figure slowly turned their head and looked at me. I pulled my hand back. Their eyes were calm, no anger, no emotion, just a steady gaze. I whispered, "Who are you?" No response. The figure just stared at me for a few moments, then looked forward again. I looked around at the other passengers. No one noticed this strange person beside me. I tried making eye contact with a nearby passenger, a woman with headphones, but she ignored me. As the bus reached my stop, I stood up, heart pounding. The figure remained seated, staring ahead. I stumbled off the bus and onto the sidewalk, looking back through the window. The figure didn't move, didn't follow me. I walked away quickly, feeling the cold air on my face, trying to calm down. At work, I could barely concentrate. I kept thinking about the figure's face, their eyes, the way no one else seemed to see them. That evening, I took a taxi home, avoiding all buses. The ride was expensive, but I didn't care. I just wanted to feel safe. The next morning, I hesitated before leaving my apartment. I stood in my hallway, keys in hand, debating what to do. Should I take the bus again or try something else? Finally, I decided to take a different route, maybe walk part way and then catch a bus from another line. I walked several blocks, checking over my shoulder frequently, seeing only normal people rushing around, cars passing by. No sign of the figure. After about 15 minutes, I reached a different bus stop and waited. When the bus came, I climbed on and found a seat at the very front, near the driver. I focused on the road ahead, determined not to look around. For a while, nothing happened. The bus moved through the city, picking up and dropping off passengers. I relaxed slightly, thinking maybe I had escaped this strange presence. But as we neared my destination, I heard a quiet sigh behind me. I turned slowly. The figure sat in the back row, facing forward, but I could see their profile. They were on the bus again. My throat tightened. I left the bus at the next stop, even though it wasn't mine. I stepped onto the sidewalk and watched the bus continue. Through the rear window, I saw the figure turn their head and look straight at me until the bus turned a corner and disappeared. I tried different strategies over the following days. I changed my schedule, took random buses at random times, sometimes even taking the subway. No matter what I did, eventually I would see that figure. If not outside the bus, then inside, sitting quietly. If I took the subway, I spotted them standing on the platform or in a distant corner of the car, always looking, always calm. No one else seemed to notice. I once bumped into another passenger, pointing toward the figure, asking, "Do you see that person?" The passenger just shrugged and walked away. The figure remained silent, observing. I stopped sleeping well. I dreaded leaving my home, but I had to work. I had no car, and the city was too large to walk everywhere. Public transport was my only option, and the figure knew it. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? A stranger follows me on buses, but no one else sees them. I would sound crazy. One night, leaving work late, I hoped to slip away unnoticed. I took a random bus going in the opposite direction of my usual route, just to buy time. As soon as I sat down, I felt a presence behind me. I turned and saw the figure sitting a few rows back, hands folded, face blank. I jumped off at the next stop without looking back, then waited for another bus in the freezing cold. At this point, I was desperate. I needed answers. The next time I saw the figure sitting nearby, I gathered my courage and spoke directly to them, loudly. "Why are you following me?" My voice shook. A few passengers looked at me like I was strange, but the figure showed no reaction. They didn't turn their head. They just stared forward. I reached out and grabbed their arm. It felt solid but cold. They slowly turned their head and looked into my eyes. I felt my chest tighten. Then they stood up, moved past me, and stepped off the bus at the next stop without a word. I rushed to the window to watch them outside. For the first time, I saw them walking away. They moved slowly, blending into the crowd. I wanted to follow, but the bus doors closed, and we drove off. At least they had reacted. They had left the bus. The following day, I took my usual bus route, dreading what would happen. But I didn't see them outside. They weren't on the sidewalk. I checked each stop carefully. Nothing. When I arrived at work, I felt a strange relief. Maybe confronting them scared them off. That evening, I took the bus home. Still no sign. The next few days were peaceful. I started to relax, thinking maybe it was over. I allowed myself to sit by the window again, to watch the city go by without fear. About a week later, on a quiet morning, I boarded my regular bus and sat near the back. I stared out the window, sipping coffee from a thermos. Suddenly, I felt a presence beside me. I turned my head. The figure was sitting right there, closer than ever before. They had chosen the seat next to mine. I jumped, spilling some coffee on my shirt. I looked around, panicked, but the other passengers were busy with their own lives. I tried to speak, but no words came out. The figure turned slightly, looked straight at me with that calm expression. I saw their eyes up close, dark, steady, almost empty. I whispered, "What do you want?" They said nothing. They reached out slowly and placed a hand on my shoulder. The hand felt light but firm. I froze, my heart hammering. Then the figure stood up and moved toward the front of the bus. I watched them exit through the front doors at the next stop. I pressed my face to the window, watching them disappear into the crowd of people on the sidewalk. They were gone again. After that encounter, the figure stopped appearing. Days turned into weeks, then months. I began to believe that I had somehow passed their test or fulfilled their purpose. I no longer saw them standing outside, no longer found them sitting next to me. My bus rides returned to normal. The city was just a city, full of strangers who didn't care who I was or where I sat. But I never forgot their face, their silent stare, the way they seemed to know my schedule better than I did. To this day, I remain nervous each time I step onto a bus. I check every seat as I walk down the aisle, expecting to see them waiting for me. So far, I've been alone. I can't explain who they were or why they followed me. I can only say that they were there, watching, tracking my movements, haunting my commute. I changed buses, changed times, tried to avoid them, but they always found me, until they didn't. Now I ride each bus with a mixture of relief and tension, wondering if one day I'll look up and see them again, staring back at me.